Thank you for coming on December 19th, so close to Christmas. Appreciate you taking the time for the holiday season to meet with us. I'm Scott Carter. I'm with the Department of Environmental Services Hydrology Program. We are the agency section responsible for administering the state river basin planning process. My staff are guests here. We're tackling for the hydrology section. Alexis Monteleschi is also in the hydrology section. We have Leanne Monroe back, who's in the water quantity permitting section. So there'll be a number of other DS staff probably involved in this, just to show them the support role. Just one other thing I wanted to mention was, there was a restructuring effort over the summer. A lot of the water planning responsibilities used to reside in the Department of Natural Resources. As part of restructuring, the breakup of DHEC, they created the Public Health Department and Environmental Services Agency. In a couple of sections, that DNR was moved out of DNR and put into the Environmental Services Agency. And all their water planning responsibilities got transferred over to DHEC. So we're administering that process. Hopefully today if you don't know much about this process yet, hopefully you've had a chance to look at the planning framework, review some of the presentations online or visit our website. Hopefully after today, you get a clear picture of what we're trying to do here with water planning in Santee River Basin. This is the 7th river basin to undergo the river basin planning framework we're going to be talking about today. We have 8 planning basins. This is the 7th to start the process. The top water basin has its own planning effort going on, which I'll describe on the next slide. This is the 7th, the last one that's going to go on South Carolina basin planning process. So at least you guys are not the guinea pigs, right? So we've got all the kinks out of the way. That's a good thing because we are on an accelerated time frame for this basin. This is usually a 2-year process. We're condensing that down to 10 months or so. We're going to hear about Water at Sea, that new planning group, in a few minutes from Leanne. But there's a mandate, governor's executive order to complete the state water plan by the end of 2025. Because of that, this process needs to be done over the next 10 months or so. It's a little bit accelerated, but we have learned from the other basins, what's important to talk about and how we can streamline things. So we've learned a lot of lessons on having pre-scheduling to make this work. So we do that. I want to introduce John Boyer with C.M. Smith. He's our facilitator. I'm going to this is your 6th basin facilitator, correct?
Yes.
6 basins. So he's done this a few times already at other basins today. So glad to have him on board here and use his experience and lessons learned from the other basins to apply here today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Sure. We'll continue with introduction. We'll hear from all of you in just a minute. I just want to review what our main objectives are for today. First off, we'll determine if we have a quorum at each meeting. And all the river basin councils that have facilitated, I don't think there's ever been an instance we didn't have a quorum. A quorum is important for making decisions. We're not going to be making decisions really until later in the process, but that's usually the first thing we do. We do have a quorum. This is a 15-member RBC. We've got at least one person online, and we'll go through introductions in a second. Primarily, we're here to meet each other, learn about each other. We're going to learn about the river basin planning process. We're going to just quickly talk about the planning framework. I sent out a link to that to you all ahead of time. Hopefully you've had a chance just to get familiar with that. You don't need to read it word for word, but just understand it. We're going to quickly talk about the bylaws, how you work as a group, what you can and can't do. We're going to figure out when we want to elect a chair and a vice chair. So we'll talk about that later. And then we're going to spend some time at the end of the meeting discussing what your priorities are for the basin. That's going to lead into a discussion at our next meeting where we set vision and some goals. So that's what we have on tap for today's meeting. Any questions before I move on?
Lunch.
Lunch is going to be here 12:15, 12:30. So we're going to go through hour and a half presentations, and we'll break for lunch. Yeah. Restrooms are here and here. Feel free to get up if you need to use the restrooms. Online folks, can you hear me okay? I know the audio was a little garbled before, but I think that's because everybody was talking. I'm going to assume yes, unless they speak up and say they're having trouble. Detail. Okay, Scott, I think covered most of the DES planning team, but we do have a few others. Joe Kuhn is Director of Bureau Water. What's Joe's position? And Joe, if you're online and want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Sure. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes, we can, Joe.
One of the division directors, our division is now known as Water Resources, and we have the water planning piece and the water quantity permitting piece. And happy to get the Santee River Basin kicked off today, and welcome everyone, and look forward to getting started. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joe. You've met Scott, Brooke, Alexis, Leanne, Hannah Hartley, you may see from time to time. She works closely with Leanne. Andy Walkob works closely too with Brooke and Scott and the rest of the DS folks, so you may see them. From the CDM Smith side, you'll generally see me most of the time. I'll be the facilitator. Working closely with me is Kirk Westfall, and Kirk is online. If you want to introduce yourself, Kirk.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kirk Westfall. John and I have been. Can you hear me okay, John?
Yeah.
Okay. John and I have been working together on modeling the South Carolina river basins and the facilitation of these RBCs now for a number of years. And I look forward to meeting all of you and working with you on this accelerated program for the Santee.
Thank you, Kirk. This is the first time we tried using this owl, so we're getting the kinks out. Amy Shaw is also going to be supporting us, as are several other CDM Smith folks from time to time, and you'll probably meet them as we go. So that's our planning team. The planning team meets in between the River Basin Council meetings, along with the chair and the vice chair that you'll probably elect in a meeting or two. And the point of the planning team meetings is to help set the agenda for the upcoming meetings, figure out if there's any problems that need to be resolved. The planning team, again, is CDM Smith folks, DES, and then whoever you elect as the chair and vice chair. Okay, well, let's get into introducing and learning more about you all. This is the roster. I will send out a roster to everybody that includes your email addresses in case you want to email each other. You probably already have them just from looking at the meeting invites, but I think there's 14 folks, and we've got pretty good representation from the 8 or so water interest categories. I think we've kind of combined two of the interest categories into one a little bit here, but we don't have anybody under water-based recreation. That's the one unique thing about this group. So let's do some introductions, and let's start at this side of the table. So I want to know name, organization, why did you decide to serve on the RBC? Tell me a little bit about how familiar you are with the process. We've got people like Jason, who have spent 29 meetings with the Edisto RBC, Brandon Stutz, who may or may not be online, he is yet with Dominion Energy, that's on 2 different RBCs. Very familiar with it. Some of you may have been following the process for other river basins, or some of you may have just learned about it. So I want to understand how familiar you are with it, if you've looked at the planning framework, where you're coming from. And then, if there's just one thing that you can tell us to help remember you by, it can be anything. And I'll start. My name is John Boyer. I've been with CDM Smith for 31 years almost. Familiar with the planning process, and we've been working on it since we started the Edisto back in 2020. One thing about me, I didn't think what I was going to say. Here's something I just learned. So my wife and I had the same birthday, same year, same date. And then I just realized a couple weeks ago that my daughter's boyfriend, who she's been dating for 2 years, she and her have the same birthday, same date. Well, hopefully she didn't use that as a criteria when she was. Anyway, that's one unique thing about me. So Sarah, let's start with you.
So I specialize in commercial business with Tony Cook State Home. That's really not why I'm a rural property owner in Orangeburg. And I really got interested in this whole process because I had to do a permit for my wedding. And I got to know Courtney Kimmerer, and that was really interesting. And then I was invited to whatever that council planning part was a couple months ago to learn more about this process. And Brooke, right, inspired me with her stories and said she thought it would be fun if I joined the council because I was the only one who asked a question during the whole meeting. So I'm going to go with number one, not very familiar, but I really want to learn more about water as a resource in South Carolina, but not the owner. I think it's really important. So a couple things. I'm the only one who asked about lunch, first of all. Grabbing people don't do well in committee meetings because they're not eating. And I love action movies. So, you know, the Diner movies, the Lethal Weapon movies, the Mission Impossible movies. I can talk to anyone about those.
You consider Die Hard a Christmas movie or?
Ruth Gillis said he didn't. So I'm going to go with that.
It's been debated.
It's been debated, and they're showing it now. So along with, yeah. The fifth one with Jay Courtney, he's very hot in that. I highly recommend it, even though I was one of the being of.
That's TMI.
Well,
John.
Yeah. I'm John Greco. I'm representing Friends of Congaree Swamp, which is an advocacy group for Congaree National Park. I've been president for 20 years. I'm also chair of the Richland County Conservation. I hope to represent their interests as well. I was a professor of statistics at the University of South Carolina for over 30 years, and I've been retired 3 years. I have done blood hydrology research, and I also participate in the DES Adopt a Stream program. I'm both a volunteer and a volunteer trainer. I followed the Santee River Basin process and the Broad River Basin process, but didn't participate. I was just kind of waiting for a position to open up on a basin that included Congaree National Park, and so I put myself in about a 2.5. I did this in some of the Broad River Basin Council meetings.
Good, great. Okay, John.
My name is Todd Bigger. I'm golf course superintendent down in Goose Creek, down at Crowfield. Been there for 15 years. I've been on the advisory committee for the Tri-County water withdrawal, the groundwater withdrawal group, and just kind of worked my way into that and got a little bit of education from that. This kind of fit into it, but seems like it's going to be a little bit more organized than what we did with that. The process, I'm going to learn that. I'm not familiar with that, about one. One thing to know about me, I'm a ballroom dancer. Not competitive, but I like to get out and do a little cha-cha, rumba, and waltz. So if we got 15 minutes later, I'll show you. Only kidding.
Can't follow. My name is Mike Wood. I'm with Bolton and Mink, Midwest-based firm who bought me out 4 years ago. I started DDC Engineers in 1985 after leaving Santee. I was in charge of the dams and dikes and the lake system for Santee for the 8 years that I worked there. So I know that system pretty much like the back of my hand, which was my real interest in being part of this group. Like I said, left Santee in 85, but I came back, I served on the board for a term, that was in the late 90s. How familiar am I with the river basin planning process? Somewhat. You know, I understand it, understand the necessity for it. Back when we were determining how to spill by using spreadsheets before there were computers, really appreciate it. The downstream of the North Santee Dam will fail under a recurrence of the Charleston earthquake, so we had to convince FERC not to have to replace it. It cost back then over $1 billion. So the first HEC 1 program that the Corps ran, we used to determine what the effect of a failure of the North Santee Dam would have on the downstream community. So like I said, I've got a lot of useless amount of knowledge of the Santee project, so that's my rationale. Best thing to remember me, I travel with a red lab, her name is Scarlett, and she's in the back of the truck. And if I depart every 15, 20, 30 minutes or an hour, it's to check on her.
Saw her walking a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Good.
My name is Mickey Johnson. I own and operate 4J Family Farms. We're a fifth generation family farm located at headquarters between Pinewood and Remini, South Carolina. Less than half a mile from the banks of the old Santee River. I operated with my son. We've gone through several name changes, but the last 2 generations is 4J Family Farms. It's the same area. We farm in 3 counties, Sumter, Clarendon, and Williamsburg County. We're mostly commercial grain farming. We're located pretty close down, you'll talk to David Balicki here in a minute, down at the South Carolina Water Fowl Association. We're located close to them. I'm in the agriculture and irrigation. We run irrigation, a lot of people around me run irrigation, and that will be obviously my main focus is agriculture and irrigation. We are big on conservation on our farm, and everything from soil conservation to water conservation to reduction in chemical use, the whole deal. We do the whole deal, and we've been doing it when it wasn't popular to do. We've been doing it for years, and every year we try to innovate on that. As far as being familiar with the planning process, I am somewhat. I did skim through the framework that y'all provided, and I am somewhat familiar with it. And you'll find out I'm a reader. I read everything. I love to read. I may not appear that way, but that's what it is. But anyway, I would say somewhat familiar with it, but looking for a very interesting realization about how this is actually going to work is what I'm going to look for. One thing about me, I'm a 1984 Clemson graduate. Kind of runs in my family. My father-in-law was a 57 graduate. My wife was an 86 graduate. Both of her brothers graduated there. Both my children graduated there. So obviously I'm a Carolina fan, but that's one thing. We are head over heels into Clemson. Love going up there. Call it God's country. I always joy. We try to make every game. I get real busy in the fall, so I do not. But my wife never misses a football game. So there you go.
Great. Alan Fulham, Mount Pleasant Water. Interest in this, we use about 10 million gallons a day. And so Todd, you and I have met previously on the capacity use program, which I'm familiar with. I have not been part of an RBC, watched the Edisto initially. Honest with you, I lost a bit of momentum there because it took a while. But I understand, John, you're going to push this through fast. So this is 3 times fast. Speed, exciting participation. Background, I'm a scientist, chemist, environmental scientist is how I would classify myself, and have moved into management. So Todd and I share time on the groundwater stuff. Mike, I also have a golden retriever, love dogs. I have 2 girls at Clemson right now that are home. So something interesting about me beyond that, love water activities, sailing, surfing, avid at both, live down by the ocean, so love it.
Great. David.
I'm David Balicki. I'm the founder and CEO of the South Carolina Waterfowl Association. I'm a waterfowl wildlife biologist. Studied at Auburn University for my bachelor's and my master's at the University of Manitoba. And I've been here in South Carolina since, gosh, what was it, 1985. I moved here, and like many people are very concerned about our state, about its rapid growth, about traditional uses of water resources and land, and just the threats to that with the continuing increase in population of our state. Concerned about that. My interest is, since 1994, we've been a leading force in Clarendon County in land conservation and working with landowners like Mickey and others. Since that time period, about 30,000 acres of land has gone into hunting clubs with about 4,500 acres of waterfowl impoundments, critical wintering waterfowl habitat that's been developed. But that habitat uses groundwater, it uses lake water, it uses runoff in ponds, and there's about $47 million annual economic impact from those clubs. We've done all the economic research and studies through Southwick Associates to quantify all that, and we do, so we're concerned about protecting our water rights, which are now protected in the legislature through wildlife use for groundwater, and just concerned about that open space. We've promoted a lot of conservation easements for landowners. There's thousands of acres in conservation easements in Clarendon County. So that's my interest in it. I'm an avid hunter and fisherman, and I live on Lake Marion, lived there since '98. Hopefully the earthquake won't come, but I do like to hunt Indian artifacts, so if it does come and the lake drains, we'll get out there and find some artifacts. But and I do own property on the lake on Jack's Creek, which with 4 other people, we have a 415-acre tract with conservation easements on it and 4,300 feet of lakefront protected from development. So anyway, that's my interest. Like I said, I love to hunt. I'm interested. My kids also went to Clemson. I went to Auburn. It's been a very rough football year. It's been a decade for us. My wife is a Georgia fan, and she pretends to be a Clemson fan, but she's really, because our kids weren't there, but she's really a Georgia fan. But that's it. I just love the outdoors, and I'm passionate about it, and just the quality of life that it brings to South Carolina.
Great. Okay. Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia Wilson. I am the Deputy General Manager at Somerville CPW. I'm over operations, and I've been working in the environmental field for about 25 years or so. Somerville CPW purchases its drinking water from Santee, the Lake Moultrie plant. We discharge our treated wastewater into the Ashley River. I was involved in the Surface Water Withdrawal Act back probably 15 or 20 years ago, when that was being crafted with David Bays and some other folks. So I had a little bit of experience in that. And I have a lot of experience in the permitting, NPDES permitting for wastewater treatment plant and other point source discharges into different rivers and streams. So I have a lot of knowledge in that. I'm somewhat familiar with the river basin planning process. I was on the email stream for the Edisto, but not too familiar with it. I think that's about it. I think you might remember me as the world's most boring person because I can't think of anything. If you remember me, I went to Clemson in cultural engineering. My daughter's there, so we're a family too. My hobbies are college football, reading, and nothing. So that's all I think of.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Developers. I'm with Santee Cooper. I am in charge of our PERC compliance program for the reservoir. And actually, like Mike said,
Are we relicensed yet?
Back in January of last year. It took 25 years. Yeah, for sure. Actually, like Mike, I spent about 8 years working in our dam safety group, so got really familiar with how the reservoirs operate. Had a 5-year pause on that and worked with Jason and a number of other people at Charleston Water in the capital projects group, and then at the Hannigan Water Treatment Plant before coming back to take this role. So basically, I did keep an eye on all of our compliance obligations for our PERC license, which this kept me very busy the last couple of years. But because of really my familiarity with how the lakes operate, I'm a native South Carolinian, grew up kayaking on Lake Marion out of Santee State Park to head over to the Wildlife Refuge, kayaked in Congaree Swamp, so very familiar with the basin in general, have always enjoyed spending time in it. So excited to be a part of making sure that we plan out how things are allocated so that it's sustainable for me and for my 3 kids and anybody else who wants to enjoy the beauty of our state. So I would say I'm probably somewhat familiar with the river basin planning process. So got to talk to Jason some as he went through the Edisto Basin Council when I was at CWS, but have not followed it quite as closely since. So I'm looking forward to getting more familiar with how it works. And I guess one thing for everybody else to remember me by, it's probably going to sound somewhat familiar, but I'm one of 6 kids, all of whom attended Clemson.
Wow.
And my dad did not, but his dad attended on the GI Bill right after World War II. So it's the family school as well.
Awesome. Jason Thompson, worked Charleston Water System. We have 2 of our sources, Bushy Park Reservoir and Goose Creek Reservoir in this basin, which is why it's so important to us. We have a slightly bigger drinking water distribution area that covers most of Charleston County and either through retail or wholesale parts of Dorchester and Berkeley. And then our wastewater component is a little bit smaller than that, mostly confined within Charleston County. But that's why the reason we have 2 basins or 2 water reservoirs in the basin. That's why it's such an important thing to us. Obviously, I think drinking water, our water resources of the state are just so important to every single stakeholder here, and that's why it's really important that we get it right and we understand what's available. As far as familiarity with the process, I would check the box. I'm very familiar with it, but I would also say if there's one thing I've learned is how much I don't know. The longer you go through this, it is very complex. And then 2, it is the complexity of understanding what is important to each of the stakeholders so that we can actually work together to come up with solutions, which is the end goal of all this. As far as something to remember me by, I love recreation, water recreation, so you name it, I've done it, surfing, the beach, fishing, kayaking up to Edisto. I spent about 10 years scuba diving for fossils across the state of South Carolina, so where most people are familiar with the water and maybe the water column as much as their fish finder will shoot through it. I've been on most of the river bottoms in the state of South Carolina for I can picture them when I close my eyes, and sometimes that big old 5-inch megalodon tooth too. But it was just a really fun hobby that I'll hopefully get to do again. But I love every aspect of the resource, not just the ability to withdraw from it, for as long as cities are a thing, but also the importance of recreation and all the other environmental needs. So.
Great. Jason, having participated in this process before, knows that we ask and encourage you all to identify an alternate that could come in your place. Most council members find an alternate because they can't make every meeting, so it's useful to have an alternate there. When your alternate is there, they have your voting rights, basically. So Jason's brought Baker, who may be his alternate. Baker, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, sure. My name is David Stevens. I am Jason's assistant. I've been in Charlotte for about 9 months, and say I'm not very familiar with it yet, but Jason is quickly teaching me a lot of the process, and I'm interested in learning a lot more today.
Great. We'll talk more about alternates later. We do have a couple people online. So Riley, if you're online and want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, howdy, y'all. Apologies that I can't be there in person. I'm recovering from the flu, so I think y'all might be happy that I'm not there. I serve as the Land, Water, and Wildlife Program Director for the Coastal Conservation League. We are an environmental advocacy organization focusing on policy solutions, and we work at both the local and the state level. I am fairly familiar with the Water Basin Council, the planning process. I co-chair the SC Rivers Forever team for the Conservation Coalition along with Megan Chase, and work with a number of other individuals that have served on basins throughout the state. So I'm really excited to serve on this one and to meet you all in person at a future time. One thing to remember me by is that I did not go to Clemson. I actually went to UT, and I'm a native Texan, and so I'm still recovering from our loss to Georgia. But thanks all, and looking forward to meeting y'all.
Great, thank you, Ryan. And then Brandon stuff, is Brandon still on? Brandon, you want to do stuff?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Brandon Stutz, and I'm with Dominion Energy. I work in the environmental services section, and I'm an environmental consultant specializing in all things water related. Typically, it's going to be 316B, which is fish protections. I do a lot of fishery sampling and biology work, and also do a lot of wetland delineations and 404 and 401 permitting. As John mentioned earlier, I'm on several other river basin councils. With this, we've got our water reef station, which is going to be in the Santee Basin here, and so just looking forward to meeting everyone and just trying to help the process out if possible.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah. Correct, that Jeff Rubin listened online?
No.
Yeah, he's the chief of economic development with Richland County, was the fellow responsible for the Scout Motors deal in Blaine.
You don't announce yet, but we do have just 3 guests in the back. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves if you'd like. Just here with.
John Reynolds, the Forest Commission, and then VC State Forest. It's about 20,000 acres along Santee River. Like everybody else here, I went to Clemson.
Good. Yep. Great.
I'm Mark Rhodes. I'm with the Rhodes Company. We were consulting forestry and media owners. We own like 18,000 acres along Santee.
And I mentioned one word to EF person. Courtney Kemmer is online. You mentioned Courtney earlier. I want to make sure I didn't need Courtney now, because this there on the slide here. Maybe hearing from her, so can be demand projections and some other things possibly as we go. So, okay, I think we've covered all the introductions. At every meeting, we just have a short time right up front for public and agency comment. If any member of the public that's in the room or online would like to make comment, now at the time. Or any agency staff that wants to make a comment. Okay, let's move on. So I'm going to turn this over to Scott. Scott's feeling a bit under the weather, but I think he's going to be able to hammer through it. If you want us to take over, let us know, Scott. But do you want this, or do you want me to advance for you? You want me to kind of question? I'm off my hands. I think you're good. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to talk about a little bit why we're here today, a little bit about the process, why water planning is important. But as John said, I'm going to try to make it as far as I can, so we'll see how it goes. But I wanted to start by just talking about water use in South Carolina. All of you here are here because you have an interest in water resources, know the importance of water. We do use it for a variety of purposes in our state. So drinking water, of course, both ground and surface is used for drinking water. So obviously important for our health and well-being. Water is life today. It's very important to have a reliable source of water of good quality for the state. We use it in the industrial sector. We make a variety of things in the state. Industrial use in this basin is pretty big. Well, provides many different services. We have data centers coming in and things like that as well. And they use water. And then our agricultural sector, we have a long history of a tradition of farming in this state. It's been the economic engine for a long time and continues to be. Farmers need to irrigate when it's not raining. So we recognize that water is very important as well. And then we use it for energy production, whether that's hydroelectric power, or whether it's for cooling purposes with fossil fuel and nuclear plants across the state. It's used to help us turn our lights on. We have a pretty cheap, reliable source of energy, and we should, hopefully, we understand we're blessed by that, not the case in many parts of the world. So water, of course, is important for energy production. We also, our water resources also support abundant fish and wildlife resources across the state. And a lot of you guys mentioned this, and gals mentioned this. We recreate on our waters, whether it's boating, scuba diving, fishing. So those are important to us, and all those things have value. And so really what we're trying to do with this effort, what we're trying to do in other basins is we recognize we use water for a variety of purposes. Water demand is likely going to continue to grow in the future. There could be increased competition for our water resources. We want to plan to be able to meet our future water. At the same time, trying to protect our water resources, our fish and wildlife resources, and we continue to enjoy them and have those resources thrive, especially in light of a couple factors. Living in the Southeast for a number of years, we're susceptible to drought. We've had a number of multi-year droughts, really going back to the 50s, we had a pretty big drought. But recently, we've had 3 multi-year droughts, 1998 to 2002, 2007 to 2008, 2011 to 2012. And we've had shorter-term droughts, which we call flash droughts, 2016, 19, 21, and even this year we've had some flash droughts happen as well. You can see a map here just showing annual rainfall totals going back to 1895. You can see that we kind of go through cycles of wet and dry periods. Is there a, you all see that? Maybe it doesn't work. You know, it's a, Chuck can't see my screen, Anyway, so you can see the 50s for a period right here with a little bit drier. 60s and 70s, really wet period. 80s were on the drier side. 90s were fairly wet for most of that decade towards the end of it. And then we see those multi-year droughts, extended periods of low rainfall. We see that impacted our water resources and caused some concern. It drove a lot of our water planting activity from the state. You can see, it looks like we've been in a wetter period lately over the past 5 years. And if you do look at an annual rainfall total, that is true. But what you don't see in this is that rainfall seems to be falling a little bit different lately. We have periods where we go months with very little rainfall, like this past year in parts of the state. But then we get big events. Think Clean, and was it Debbie in August? I can't remember the name of it, but we had a bunch of rainfall. So even though it looks like we're in a wetter period on an annual basis or a 5-year average basis, yeah, we are, but we are going through some really dry periods. It's really mostly impacted agriculture over the past 5 or 6 years. We're probably going to have drought come again. We're probably going to have multi-year droughts. So we want to be able to plan for those, especially in light of increased water demand. We all know our population is growing, especially along the coast. A lot of growth in Charleston. We're expected to exceed 6 million by 2040. 2023 population of 5.4 million. South Carolina, I don't know if it was maybe 20, I can't remember what year it was, but recently we're the fastest growing state, not in volume, but in rate. So we're a really fast growing state. That growing populations, probably will lead to increased water demand. And if you go back and look at tree ring studies going back centuries, there's indications from those studies that we've had longer term droughts and more severe droughts called mega droughts. We only have a hydrologic period of record going back in the state, in many basins, 30s and 40s. There might be some areas that go back a little bit further. Those studies indicate that our 20th century record may have been wetter than average, and maybe a little bit above average. And so, will we see these mega droughts anytime soon? I don't know. But we've seen them in the past, evidence of them in the past. You combine that uncertainty around what climate change, how that's going to change rainfall patterns, maybe increased drought. If you look at that and then look at the growing population, increased water demand, combine these things together, it just emphasizes the need for state river basin planning. And let me also say that most of the time, we have plenty of water, right? In fact, we've had too much water in parts of the state over the past decade, really, going back to 2015 or so. We've had significant flooding along the coast. So we're kind of spoiled. We need to make sure that we kind of forget the drought sometimes. And so this planning effort is really about looking at future water demand, considering we're going to have drought again, making sure we have enough water, and plan now instead of waiting for that next drought to come. All right, so just a little bit of history of water planning. I think I mentioned this in the introduction. Prior to July 2024, water planning responsibilities was within the South Carolina DNR. We published our first plan in 1998, updated in 2004, incorporated some lessons learned from the 2002 drought. One of the big recommendations from that 2004 plan was to do regional planning on a regional basis, not just on a statewide basis, but on a regional basis. In 2014, we initiated the first steps to fulfill this recommendation. We're calling these regional water plans river-based plans now. Pursuant to Act 60 of 2023, effective this past July, the water planning responsibilities in our hydrology program were transferred to the new Department of Environmental Services. So this planning process involves developing these 8 river basin plans for the 8 planned basins in the state shown here on the map. And the idea is that this is going to be a bottom-up approach. Let's let stakeholders, those with water interest in the basin, those who care about the basin, drive the development of their own plan. And then collectively, these river basin plans are going to form the foundation of the new state water plan. And John, did the water and sea slides get?
They're coming up.
Oh, they're coming up, okay. The water and sea group, you'll hear about a little bit from Leanne. It is going to take an oversight role in the development of that state water plan. Okay, so when we started this about 10 years ago, we envisioned this to be a 5-step process where we would develop what we call surface water assessments and groundwater assessments. These are hydrologic models to give us an idea of how much water we currently have. Surface water assessments first round was completed in 2017 by John Warrior's group at C.M. Smith. These models are updated as needed. The Santee model is in the process of being updated to extend the period of record, account for any changes in water withdrawals and things like that. The groundwater assessment is being developed by the USGS. This has been a long-term project to develop groundwater models in the coastal plain where most of our groundwater resides. However, we've had some delays in getting that model calibrated, and so the model for the groundwater side is not going to be available for this iteration of planning. We still have an ongoing project with the USGS to complete that work. That's going to be work that's going to be incorporated in a later iteration of planning. And then we need to calculate or just try to estimate how much water we think we're going to use in the future. So we came up with a water demand projection report back in 2019, and we're using that as the basis. We kind of modify here and there a little bit as well. And then the projections are completed for each basin as needed, and projections are in progress for the lower Santee as well. And then using this water assessment, the demand projections, look at future water availability. We'll ask questions, will we be able to meet that future demand or not? If not, what are we going to do about it? What kind of management strategies can we come up with now to address potential shortages in the future? All that will be documented in the River Basin Plan. These River Basin Plans are being developed under what we call the South Carolina State Water Planning Framework. It was published back in 2019. I have another slide to talk a little bit more about that. I think it's the next slide. And then again, as I said before, these River Basin Plans will come together to form the new state water plan. Along the way, we've had a number of cooperators. Army Corps of Engineers helped us with some of the water demand projection methodologies early on. Of course, C.M. Smith has helped in a number of basins with technical support. They developed a model facilitation. Brown and Caldwell has served as facilitator in the PD Basin. And Clemson University has been a strong partner in many of our other basins as well. And of course, the USGS has provided a little bit of groundwater technical support in working on that groundwater model we hope to have next iteration of planning. All right, so a little bit about the PPAC. You guys may be aware of this planning process advisory committee that was convened by DNR in March 2018. They're a group of stakeholders across the state, water utility, conservation groups, power companies, academia. There's some farmers on that as well. They came together to kind of provide DNR with guidance on how these river basin plans should be put together. And all this is documented planning framework. It is available online if you want to take a peek at it. That's still driving a lot of the work we're doing in the Santee. This PPAC has been dissolved since restructuring, and a new Water SC committee has recently replaced the PPAC, and I guess Leanne will be talking about that a little bit later. So contents of the framework. It's an introduction, just talking about the importance of water planning while we're doing this. Chapter on the river basin planning process, the methodologies we use for evaluating water availability. There's a really detailed table of contents for river basin planning there. How this river basin planning process should be implemented in 8 different basins. And there's a chapter on river basin plan implementation, and we have a slide on that we'll go over later what we mean by that. And then a chapter on how the state water plan should be put together. And of course, I think John referenced this earlier, in the appendix is the River Basin Council bylaws we ask y'all to abide by as we go through this process. All right, so where are we at in this? As I said, you guys are the 7th basin to apply the South Carolina State Water Planning Framework. 2 basins have been completed. Yes, there was the first one to go through this process, was completed in June 2023. The project was completed earlier this year. We now have 6 basins ongoing, including PD, Blue to Upper Savannah, Lower Savannah, Catawba, and the Santee, we just started. A lot of these are about to be done this spring or summertime period, so a lot of these are going to start rolling in preparation for putting the state water plan together later in 2025. The Catawba Water Reef, we're treating differently. Many of you may be, or some of you may be familiar with the Catawba Water Reef Water Management Group. It's a group of utilities along with Duke Energy. They have a nonprofit organization that does water supply planning. These utilities are both North and South Carolina. Came out of the FERC licensing project back in mid-2000s, 2006, 2010 timeframe, 2006, 2007 timeframe. Been doing water supply planning since then. I think the first water supply plan was published in 2014, and they're currently developing what they call the water resources, integrated water resources plan. And we're not just looking at water quantity, but water quality as well. And they're supposed to have that done sometime in 2025. So they've done a lot of great work. We didn't want to kind of reinvent the wheel there. We kind of let their planning process for the water supply plan fill in as a stand-in for River Basin Plan for South Carolina. Yes, sir.
Was it designed that the Santee program was going to be the later one downstream, or for some reason when I started looking at it, it was like you've got to have it completed already, but we're just beginning.
I think one of the drivers that started over Santee last was we wanted to make sure the upstream bases were completed and we were complete. I think that we were the downstream. Yeah. I got a question. Let me piggyback from Todd. Really,
when I look at the, because I was involved in that ESCO, which I believe started in maybe 21, I don't know, it seems like a while ago.
Started during COVID.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Most of those are either, we're looking at 2 years roughly, and so obviously we are on the compressed timeline, because I'm guessing we're really 6 to 8 months. We'd like to have this basically that's accurate.
8 to 10.
8 to 10. Yeah. So, half the time, or more than half of what the other basins took. The last one to go, so I hope the efficiencies would be gained there. Yes. But do you think that's realistic that we're going to get through this in 10 months? I mean, that's.
Well, it's going to be challenging. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy. I do think that we have learned a lot in other basins about what's material is important to present. How can we speed some things up? Maybe we can drop some things out. And we're going to let y'all weigh in on some of that, I think, later in this meeting about what kind of topics y'all want to go over. Because we're not going to be able to be as exhaustive here as we were in other basins.
Which I appreciate. And I guess another question that really matters more than do you think is reasonable is what happens if, 10 months down the road, Water SC, I assume, needs this information so they can meet the bigger time. At some point, we will just be finished, right? Like, what happens if we need another 6 months, or we feel this group needs another 4 months?
Well, the goal is to wrap this up fall time frame. Part of this process is going to involve presenting this out to the public, so there'll be a public meeting involved. We may scale back the number of public meetings we do, just to save time. we talked about this, and John, you may talk about it a little bit more later, but, if we need to perhaps meet virtually just for an hour or two, just to cover a few things in between in-person meetings, we'll not throw those ideas out to you at a later time. Just to check, how can we plan out to make sure we can meet our goals?
But we have a hard stop, right? I guess that.
We do, but my goal is to get it done, but if it's not, the final draft isn't completely done, maybe we can still use enough information from the plan to incorporate the state water plan. But it's a little bit of an unknown. It's a press timeline.
It will be monthly?
Yes, sir.
And I will say the intent is for the River Basin Councils to continue on, even after you develop your plan, you'll continue to meet, quarterly, like year, whatever you think. What you may need to do during this first phase, since they're time limited, is just understand that, there are certain things we're not going to be able to solve or do or analyze during the first 10 months. Push that for after we've done a draft final plan and speed that for the next update. We may need to defer some things that the other councils had more time to do.
Yeah, I want to add that, that we had, in this first portion of the plan, there's a lot of educational material, and some of that could be offered in the interim time. And we learned a lot from doing a lot of these. We had some hiccups with our groundwater planning, and so we figured that out. And so I think that we can move forward. We've got some proven methodologies now to get the information out, I think, in a good way that's useful to be incorporated in both the River Basin plan and then later in the state water plan. So we feel optimistic, and I think we can do it.
You are a smaller group too, which limits the discussion somewhat. The Saluda River Basin Council is the largest, it's 27 members, and they've been spending the last 4 or 5 months developing recommendations, which is just a lot of discussion for 3 to 4 hours each time. And we don't have the luxury to do that, but hopefully because we're a smaller group, it won't take us that long. In phase 4, which we'll talk about when you start developing some of your recommendations.
Since you don't have the groundwater assessment models in place lately, in general, how has that affected planning and recommendations?
Obviously, we were looking at a 50-year planning horizon. To be able to do that, you need to be able to simulate. We're going to talk about this in a few slides, but different water use scenarios we're talking about doing, putting them in a model and seeing what the impacts on the groundwater resource will be. That's something that's had to be left out of the PD. We did do a little bit of that simulations in the Edisto. So there is some groundwater modeling review for the Edisto, but we were trying to apply it to the PD, unless we ran into some calibration issues. So in place of that, we can look at as much data as we can, and we have a slide going through some of the stuff we're going to look at. And we'll just have to do the best we can with the information and studies we already have, knowing that it's incomplete. We know it's going to be incomplete, and it should be a major focus of the next iteration of water planning. Does that answer your question? Sure.
We're going to make this plan, I'm assuming basically on what we have right here, because this is natural resource, it's going to evolve with weather extremes from floods to droughts, which we're going to have. This plan, help me understand, what is this, like a recommendation, or this is an actual framework?
It's going to include a technical review of future water availability. We're going to try to identify where we may have water shortages or any type of stress in our water resources. And then identifying those, what kind of strategies or how can we manage water in the basin, with recommendations from you guys on how to do that. How can we plan now instead of later? And we're going to touch a little bit more on this idea of models in a few slides. The river, there'll be some that's going to be covered in some other slides. Okay, yes, sir.
Does the authority to implement these recommendations rely on the state legislature?
Well, it can. Some recommendations certainly would have to be perhaps driven by the legislature. There's a lot of strategies and recommendations at the local level that I think you guys can help implement without state legislative approval. If you're talking about obviously changes to water law or something, which is probably going to be a topic we're going to discuss, yeah, that would be a legislative type of thing. But there's stuff locally that you guys can do maybe on your.
There's no, like, the recommendation for, it's planning, it's, but to restrict water use requires legislative action.
Well,
Yeah, this planning body doesn't have any authority in that regard. You're just providing an advisory role, more or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, that helps.
We're gonna address some of that question on the later slide. I may try to do one more section, John. Oh, yeah, one more section, and I might turn it over to you.
Okay.
As I said, we have 2 completed river basin plans. They're available online. If I remember, I'll try to bring a couple copies to the next meeting so you guys can look at it, okay? But meantime, you can look at them online and kind of get an idea of what you're developing. You can already see what kind of strategies or recommendations are being made in other basins, okay? All right, okay, I guess I'll turn it over to Leanne to talk a little bit about water at sea.
Thanks, Scott. So, as Scott kind of alluded to already, we have the new directive from the governor for water at sea. Scott has given a really great overview of the water planning in the state already, so I'll do that. But the main things are the charge of the group working is to develop this newest state water plan. And so all the work in these different river basin councils are going to be advising and go into this comprehensive state water plan. And the goal of the comprehensive plan is to balance these economic, environmental, and social needs, ensure resiliency within our resources and protect it for future uses, and to support and facilitate additional collaborative efforts and existing initiatives. So a big part of that is this kind of group right here. So this is a really important, and I know you all know that, that's why you're here. So these are just some of the dates we have going on right now. We did have a stakeholder engagement plan due in October, and that's actually on the Water SC website if you're interested in reading that. We have a report to the Surface Water Study Committee due at the end of January. So we have an outline, we're going to be working on that. And then, of course, the updated plan is due at the end of December. And to get all the information, we've been doing monthly meetings. There have been 3 meetings so far. They are all available online. They are streamed by SCE TV, and they are posted on the Water SC website. So you can go review those. The next meeting is January 16th. In addition to the general meetings, there are listening sessions, and there's going to be, I believe, 3 or 4 rounds of those. And that's when you have a broader group of stakeholders coming in and just giving comments. So we, DES will be there to hear comments from broader stakeholders. The first listening session is actually going to be at the State Farmers Market in, I believe, West Columbia, and it will be January 7th. That information is also, once again, on the Water SC website. Yeah.
And if we wanted to get involved just as coming up to speed as an RBC and what we, may end up submitting to Water SC, is there a meeting you would recommend over another that we attend, just as a stakeholder?
So I would even say, go to the listening sessions, and even streaming any of the monthly meetings. Like I said, it's going to be the 16th for the next one. And like I said, we do actually have also on the Water SC website, there is a way to submit comments. So you can do it directly that way, or I believe there's a Water SC email, you could send them directly to there. But I believe the comment link is also.
So we can attend in person on the 16th. Stakeholders can attend.
Yes, you can attend in person as well. So feel free to do that. I don't know when the next one is after that, but I know the 16th is the next one. I believe the last one we had was last Thursday. And that one is already up to stream as well.
And I think they're still kind of working on the agendas for the monthly meetings. So I kind of expect that we'll probably have developed the agendas a few months in advance here in the next month or two. And you'll have more information about what meetings may be useful to attend.
Right. And just as an example, John actually gave a talk at the last one talking about the kind of main recommendations that a lot of the other RBCs kind of had consensus on that were kind of common across them. So even just looking at that would be helpful, but all presentations and just the stream is available. But it's great information. And the group in general, so it's made up of a group, it's very similar to this. It's a broad spectrum of sectors. So you've got academia, water suppliers, forestry and ag, energy, commerce, everyone's coming together just like this group, but it's just spread across statewide instead of just localized. So that's the perk of here. You can get more specific in your region of what you believe is the most important, whereas this group is kind of looking at broad, trying to bring everything together. And then, like I said, they're having a statewide resource-based approach, remaining committed to the process. So once again, it's really important for you guys to also keep abreast of what they're doing. Serving as this voice and connection for stakeholder sectors. So it might even be good to know who in your sector is on that group, so they can kind of be that funnel to give them information to bring comments into that working group. And we want to be very transparent and collaborative in this whole process, and so that's why we're doing this. I think it's really important, and I think it's a good way to kind of bring all of the other basin plans together and kind of have like a kind of fresh group of folks looking over all of the regional based plans. That's all I had.
All right. So I might deviate from the agenda just a little bit. Since lunch is here, it's almost 12:10. How about we break for lunch, get your lunch, we take about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to cover some of the rest of the material, perhaps while you're finishing up your lunch. Everybody okay with that? Yep, so online folks, it's 7. You're attending online, you're going to start back up around 12:25, maybe touch earlier. So 12:25. So. Okay. Okay, let's talk about what is a river basin plan. The plan is what you all are going to be preparing. And don't get too nervous. You're not going to actually have to be doing the writing. We'll be doing the writing for you. Our role is to listen to you all. You give us direction. We've got meeting minutes, meeting notes that will be prepared. We often go back and listen to the recordings. But basically, we take input from you and we put it into a river basin plan. So the river basin plan asks 4 questions. What's the current available water supply and demand? What are the current permitted and registered water uses? What will the basin's water demands over the planning horizon be, and how will the water supply meet those demands? That's the critical piece. We're really doing a planning exercise, looking 50 years into the future, trying to figure out, is there enough groundwater? Is there enough surface water to meet expected demands? So that's key to this whole thing. And then, almost important, or as important, what strategies do we need to employ to ensure that we can meet those demands, that there's not gaps or shortages? The ESO planning process, actually, Jason recommended a strategy which is called a low flow management strategy, and it was keyed upon flows in the Edisto River dropping to a certain point, and upstream users volunteering to reduce their flows, to switch from surface water to ground. And that was one of the unique strategies of all of our basin councils, I think, is that low flow strategy that Jason proposed and we got approved. So that's one example of a water management strategy. We'll talk a lot more about other strategies, but there's already a lot in place that are going on. Aquifer storage and recovery, water reuse. I know Alan and Mount Pleasant have been looking into water reuse as an example. So we'll have a lot of discussion around strategies that are appropriate for this basin. That bottom thing there, proactive water management, not reactive, that's kind of the whole key here. We're trying to be proactive, think ahead, and not have to fix problems as they occur. The guiding principles of these plans, Those are in the framework, right? There's more guiding principles outlined in the first part of the framework than we've got here. These are some of the more important ones. The limited natural resource, we need it for economic development. We need it to sustain existing users. We need it for growth. We need it for environmental protection. So we have to balance all those uses, which is the second one, striving for equitable use. How do we figure out how we can meet the demands of all the upstream uses and the in-stream uses? The in-stream uses are what we need for recreation, ecological health. And then the plan should protect the public's health and well-being, balance social, economic, and environmental needs. Same thing I just said. So we're looking 50 years into the future. We're going to be talking about planning scenarios that we do for year 2070. So almost 50 years, but we're kind of focused on year 2070. We're going to look at surface and groundwater. We're going to focus on quantity. There's been a lot of discussion around water quality, and there's acknowledgement there's strong relationship between quantity and quality. And it doesn't necessarily make sense to disassociate the two and just focus on quantity. Nevertheless, this planning process is trying to focus mostly on quantity. After this first phase, then you can focus on quality issues. And a lot of the river basin councils have put in their implementation plans their desire to focus on specific water quality issues in later phases of planning. But for now, we're going to focus mostly on quantity. We touched on this earlier. The plan that you prepare is not a regulatory document. I hope that is going to inform the state water plan, which may be a regulatory approved or a legislatively approved document. But the plan in itself isn't going to be used for regulation. Some of the river basin councils have been making a recommendation that the permitting process that DES does, whether it's surface or groundwater permitting, should be in alignment with what's ever written in the river basin plans. So in that regard, if the legislature said, yeah, we agree, these plans prepared by stakeholders should inform permitting decisions, then there would be a tie to regulation.
Is there not currently?
There is not currently a tie.
There are no teeth in what we were.
There's currently no teeth, exactly. Yeah. Okay, the plan is to update these every 5 years. The model I cited, work that's been going on in Georgia since 2008, 2010. They did an initial state plan, and then they did 11 regional plans. 11 regional plans, which are very similar to what we're going to prepare, have been updated twice already. So they've been working on a 5-year cycle to update their demand projections, rerun the models, talk about any new emerging issues, come up with new water management strategies or tweak water management strategies as needed, and then resubmit their plans. So they've been doing an ongoing process that's been funded by the legislature since 2008, 2010 or so. That's the idea here. We'll see if this folds out that way, but that would be the thought, continue this process, and continue to update. Okay, the plan that we're going to prepare has a standard table of contents, introduction, chapters 2 and 3 describe the basin, covers land use, it covers all the different demands for water. Chapter 3 talked about the water resources of the basin. We use a lot of USGS stream flow data, create a bunch of tables and charts. Talk about climate, that's actually in chapter 2. Climate drivers, trends in climate. Chapter 4 is the projected demands, current demands. Chapter 5 and 6 is kind of the meat of the report. That's where we use the surface water model and we do some groundwater work, not the models in this phase, but later on to compare supply to demand now and into the future. Chapter 6 then looks at the results of that comparison and says, do we need strategies to help meet those demands into the future? Eliminate and reduce shortages, make sure there's enough water that can be effectively used by all sectors. Chapter 7 then recommends those strategies. Chapter 8 focuses on drought response. They'll be developing drought response recommendations. We'll talk about that maybe even beginning at the next meeting. Depending on when we schedule the meeting, we may have Hope Mazel from the State Climate Office come in and talk about climatology and talk about drought response. Chapter 9 is where you get to develop legislation, excuse me, you get to develop, not legislation. You get to develop recommendations. Your recommendations may be to revise legislation. There's several categories of recommendations. One is policy, legislative, and regulatory, and that's when there's been a lot of healthy discussion. And the EDSA talked for 4 or 5 meetings about potential changes. We try to, and I'll talk about this later, we try to reach consensus on recommendations. And a lot of the River Basin councils have been able to reach consensus on all the recommendations. In the EDSA and in the Saluda, which we just had a meeting yesterday, obviously weren't going to have consensus amongst the RBC members. Consensus is like when you can live with a recommendation or you can live with the decision. You might not be 100% fine with it, but you're comfortable enough, you discussed it, and you're ready to just move forward with it for the better good of the group. That's what we define as consensus. We weren't able to reach consensus on some contentious topics that have to do with legislation, permitting process. So we just did a vote, and we documented what that vote was. Sometimes there was a strong majority. For example, the topic of reasonable use, which we'll discuss later, everybody but one person said, yes, we need reasonable use for surface water. That might not make sense to most of you, but we'll talk about that later. But one person didn't, so we documented that. Then we talked about, should there be separate processes for permits and registrations, or should there just be one permitting process that every water use sector applies with? And there's a lot of healthy debate on that, and the EDSA was evenly split on that topic. So sometimes we come to consensus, sometimes we don't. But we will spend as much time as we can on developing recommendations. That's a very important part of the plan. All of that then gets into an implementation plan. So that's where we document the water management strategy. Develop actions and strategies to implement those recommendations and those water management strategies. Any questions about what's going to be in our plan? Okay.
I've got one, number 10, implementation. Obviously, we're going to take our plan and put it in state law. So that is the implementation.
So it's unknown yet how the state water plan is going to be informed by the River Basin plans. Hopefully, the state water plan will pull all the results of the modeling and the recommendations and consolidate it into the state water plan, and maybe even adopt each one of these plans as an appendix or something to the state water plan. I'm not sure yet. I think so.
That would be the implementation.
So the implementation plan is, for example, some of the like the broad, well, I'll give you an example later on actually, but like the broad River Basin Council did modeling, and they realized 50 years in the future there's going to be a couple pinch points in the basin when there's not enough water to meet demands for a water utility, right? And they had to come up with some strategies to meet those demands. So they said, okay, well, we need to add an additional intake on the Broad River so that Cherokee Board of Public Works has enough water to meet their demand. In the implementation plan, then there's actions that help them achieve that. Most of the implementation plan is centered around the recommendations you make, though. An example of that might be, oh, we need more monitoring of groundwater. We've got an area where we think there's a lot of groundwater use, but no monitoring wells there. And you don't know if the water level is declining, we're dewatering the aquifer, there's going to be problems. So we have a recommendation to put in a monitoring area there. That would be in your implementation plan. The implementation plan includes time frame. It focuses on the first 5 years. It includes how do we get this, who's responsible to do it? Is it DES? Is it the legislature? Is it the Army Corps? Is it Santee Cooper? And then, what does it cost? So we try to present a lot of information in that plan so that someone can implement it, whether it's BC's responsibility or DES or what. So you'll see an example of that later on.
Who has the ultimate authority over surface waters? Is it federal Corps or is it state?
Well, so it's kind of a mix. I mean, DES has regulatory authority over most of it, but then there's parts where the Army Corps has authority, like it's navigable. Yeah, it's navigable. They operate, Savannah River and they have operations in the Santee Basin, correct?
Yeah, state's teacher.
Yep. So a little, mostly state, a little bit federal.
So they would, but can the court, the federal government, can they control use? Because all these waters are mapped.
Yeah, so one in the FERC, it's a federal entity.
Yeah.
They can control use from their reservoirs.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we develop this plan? You all develop it, you're the stakeholders that are putting it together. We'll talk about bylaws in a minute. I talked a little bit about consensus-based decision-making. We're going to try to come to consensus on recommendations, on strategies. If we can't come to consensus after debate, then we'll try to do it by majority vote. Again, most of the councils have been able to come to consensus on everything, but when we can't, then we just do it by majority vote. You're going to elect a chair and a vice chair. In the ESO, because we were having to meet virtually for almost the first year, everybody couldn't really get together and meet each other like you're doing right now. It's hard to meet your fellow council members, and they decided let's wait for 8, 9, 10 months before we elect a chair. I don't recommend that here, especially given you have to do this in 10 months or less. The other River Basin Council said, well, let's meet 2 or 3 times and then we'll have a better idea of who we think should be chair and vice chair. And then they elected the chair or vice chair after the 3rd or 4th meeting. Yeah, I probably don't recommend that because you won't meet 10 times. So my recommendation would be maybe elect a chair at the 2nd meeting or the 3rd meeting, but that's up to you all. Maybe what we'll do is we'll talk about it at the next meeting. If you're comfortable and you want to elect a chair and vice chair, great. The chair and the vice chair, again, help us set agendas. They don't have any more voting power or anything. Everybody is one person, one vote. But there's someone that, is engaged in the process, is willing to meet for 1 hour in between meetings virtually with us, DES, to help talk about the agenda, talk about field trips and taking them, make decisions. Outside of that, there's not much more responsibility. Usually, I'll ask the chair to open up the meeting and close the meeting. Sometimes the chair also helps keep us on track. If I'm not doing a good job of narrowing the focus of the discussion, they'll chime in and say, hey, let's get back and refocus, that kind of thing. So think about it if you're interested in being the chair. We need a chair and a vice chair, and the only requirement is that they can't come from the same water interest category. So it couldn't be 2 people from water supply or 2 people from ag and irrigation and forestry. It has to be different sectors. Okay, your roles and responsibilities. We're going to be doing modeling. You're going to be reviewing results of modeling, and you're going to help us identify shortages or conflicts using those models. Probably in the 3rd or 4th meeting, we'll do an overview of the models. We'll even offer training on the model. We'll offer training on the model if you want it. That'll be a separate meeting. In the other basins, usually a third to a half of the council is interested in actually getting their hands wet and diving into the models. Jason did. He spent some time doing his own scenario, I think, didn't you, for the Eddystone? Yep.
What model was used?
So it's a model called the Simplified Water Allocation Model that C.M. Smith developed for applications just like this. It's not overly detailed. It's simple enough that if you know how to use Microsoft Excel, it's housed in Excel. It's fairly easy to learn, but that said, you can't just spend a couple hours and suddenly you're an expert. There's a lot of nuances to it. But it's a model that we've used to support this type of regional river basin and statewide water planning here and in other places in the U.S. Okay, you're going to help develop strategies. You're going to develop a river basin plan. One of the things you're going to be asked to do, or we encourage you to do, is communicate what you're doing with others. I and other council members have been doing presentations at the SCEC conference in March every year. Salute in the Broad, I presented there. We've done presentations at Clemson's Water Resources conference that they do every 2 years. We've done presentations at rural water meetings. And sometimes RBC members do those presentations. So if you want to do a presentation about what you've been talking about as a group, let me know and I'll be happy to provide materials for you, slides for you, anything that you need. But we encourage you to get the word out amongst stakeholders that may have interest in this. So reach out to me if you think of an opportunity and you want to kind of go out there and engage with the public. One thing that we do ask you to consider is that when you do that, make sure you're clear whether you're representing the council or you're speaking on your own behalf. We don't want you to speak on your own behalf, suggesting that, oh, this is what the council all decided. So there's a distinction there. Just be sure you're not mixing up those two. Okay, I mentioned you're going to get the opportunity to make recommended changes to policy or legislation, and then talk about the 5-year plan. All right, Brooke, you want to cover this part, or do you want me to read through it? Okay. We're just going to get a little bit of information just on your basin, on your basin's demand, groundwater, surface water.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Okay, so kind of set the setting. We're in the lower Santee Basin, and we're doing this basin last because we are the basin that's downstream from the Broad and the Saluda and the Catawba. And it's a significant regulation upstream from reservoirs and hydroelectric projects from Duke, Dominion, and other smaller power companies. There's 2 really large, really important reservoirs, Lake Moultrie, Lake Marion, and then we also have Bushy Park Reservoir and the Goose Creek Reservoir. Most of the water traveling down into the coastal plain, there's a big tidal influence. There's a large estuary system, and one of the things that we'll discuss kind of with the SWAM model is that we stop at the tidal interface due to limitations in the current model.
But that moves up and down with the flows in the river, doesn't it?
The tide?
No, I'm talking about if you have a big drought, then saltwater intrusion moves further up the river.
Oh, yes, sir. So, and one of the things that with the regulations of the dams, like especially like the Panopolis Dam coming out of the large reservoirs, is that they adjust the amount of flow to keep that saltwater intrusion plug at bay so that it wouldn't reach like the back river with the Bushy Park Reservoir.
It's like during the drought, where you show the lake.
Yes.
So when they can't meet those federal regs, what happens then?
That I don't actually have the answer for that question, but I know that the flows are regulated to do so. How do we manage when there's a drought and we're unable to keep saltwater at bay? So if there's the reservoirs move from the top of the basins down, they'll stepwise to keep those levels. Yeah.
Yeah. So, speak to that a little bit. Sure. Yeah, the short answer to that is that the flow onto the Cooper River is our top priority because of the drinking water flows that are downstream. So it will not get curtailed unless it's just catastrophic drought and we can't maintain reservoir levels even above any kind of reasonable level. So the flows into the Santee would get curtailed much more.
Okay, so you shut down some stations. Okay.
Yeah.
That was what I was headed.
What do you know that number is it 3,600?
At Cooper River, it's 4,500 cubic feet per second, usually on a basis, with variability if we do see saltwater intrusion beginning to creep up towards the Bushy Park. So there's variability in that, and we've got license to, upon notification from USGS, increase those flows if we have to make sure Bushy Park Reservoir is protected.
Yeah, 45.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I just add that obviously the salinity monitoring stations up the Cooper, but specifically in Durham Canal are key. Those that have a lot of background in the diversion, the rediversion projects, it was the diversion project that enabled the Bushy Park project in the 1950s. So Bushy Park's obviously very reliant on these contracted releases. One good thing that adds a little bit of resilience to Charleston water system is the access to 3 different sources, 2 reservoirs. Obviously, the Edisto is heavily impacted by drought, but in the event of vicinity water intrusion that was not able to be mitigated by Annapolis Dam releases, we could shift the majority of our demand to the Edisto, if need be, but obviously, service circumstances.
What led to that question with the idea of Cooper River Regional from St. Stephen? Santee Cooper bought that tooth and nail. And a lot of the reason for that was we felt like that would cause saltwater intrusion in Charleston Harbor. And all the models showed that we were wrong and the Corps was right. And then we found out later that we were right and the Corps was wrong. So that was, back then it was 50 CFS went into the Santee River from the little power plant at the spillway. And then, after St. Stephen, everything got curtailed and then the saltwater waste started moving up. So I'm just curious to see if, because that's the Corps, and Santee Cooper's a quasi-state government agency, and there was a 20-year war over that. Matter of fact, the lawsuit didn't get settled until 96, 97 over that between the feds and the state. So I'm just wondering who controls that.
I think the good news is most of that has been studied, litigated, and now is contractually included within the current PERC license.
Yeah, it's both a license requirement and a
St. Stephen's under the PERC license.
St. Stephen's is not.
Okay, again, that's why I'm asking these questions. We've been out of that for a long time.
So the set point at the Cooper River was initially lower, and when they realized the saltwater wedge was moving farther upstream than anticipated, it got bumped from, I think, 4,500 to 4,500. And that's where it's been set a long time. I'm not exactly sure when that was adjusted. But.
Sorry.
Oh, no, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be back and forth and discuss these things. Okay, so looking at water use in the basin, surface water and groundwater are both significant sources of water. And in this map here, we've got the green is denoted by, the groundwater is denoted by green dots and surface water is denoted by the blue dots. You can see that it's pretty well spread across the basin, that there's surface water and groundwater sources across the entire basin because we are in the coastal plain. Including energy, so this is excluding hydroelectric power, but it does include power generation, thermoelectric power. 94% is surface water, with only 6% being groundwater, and then you exclude that energy and you can see that groundwater portion a little bit more, and still surface water is 84% and groundwater is 16%. A majority of the groundwater, you see that kind of in the middle of the basin with a lot of agricultural wells, but then we also have some really important groundwater use when you get down towards the, towards Charleston County, where Somerville and Mount Pleasant Water Works are pulling a significant portion of groundwater.
And that's the case even though, maybe it's a later slide, but you said that the basin has really abundant groundwater resources compared to basins upstream there?
Yeah, so this entire basin lies within the coastal plain, and so underneath the coastal plain there is a vast groundwater source, and that's from sea level once being at Columbia and transgressions, regressions of the sea laid all of these groundwater aquifers. So we have 6 major aquifers within this basin, and they're all viable. There are different depths depending on where you are in the coastal plain. Some of them have, very, very, very important source of water, and we will discuss that. Even though we don't have a model, we have a lot of information about our groundwater system, and we've been collecting data in different ways, and so we'll be able to describe, who is using the water, where the water is, and how much water has been pulled out by different users. But yeah, both surface water is a bit more of a contributor in this basin, especially since we have these large reservoirs.
And what does the MGD mean?
That's in million gallons per day, the volumetric way of looking at how much water is pulled. Okay, so we're looking at the last 10 years of water withdrawals, 2013 to 2023. We don't have the 2024 numbers in yet. So this top chart, we're looking at total water withdrawals including energy, and the bottom one, total reported withdrawals excluding energy. Now this is both groundwater and surface water. I don't really see any trends here. It may even appear that it's kind of dropped down a touch, but when you look at it without excluding energy, it just kind of goes up and down. And this could be due to, we had a wet year, we had a drier year, just kind of variability in water use, but generally pulling somewhere around 500 million gallons a day, including energy, and about 160 million gallons a day, excluding that energy. And so the idea that we want to do is we understand how this demand going to change over the next 50 years. And remember, that's our planning horizon is 50 years. Are we going to have enough water to meet those needs? Is there going to be water when and where we need it for all users? Because this is supposed to be an equitable process where we are capturing the interests of every single water group so that we have a fair and balanced water plan. And how can we manage the resources over time to meet that future demand? And so that's what the idea with writing a water plan and getting down into each basin to know what each basin's needs are. Because we have an overarching water plan for the state, but to understand individual users in different parts of the state, those could be vastly different compared to the upstate, to the low country, or to the PD, which is to the Santee. So that's what we're striving to do. Okay, so we'll be using models. We'll be using one model. This is the SWAM model, CDM Smith and John Lawyer's group. He was just describing this. It's a surface water allocation model. It's just a decision-making tool that we're going to use in our toolbox to understand and assess the water availability. But each user and each node and user, a simple checks and balances system, like balancing a checkbook to see if we can identify these shortages. And we're going to be looking at different scenarios to understand under different types of demand where might these shortages lie. And then we can base our recommendations off of that information that we get. Okay, so next slide is the demand scenarios. Okay, so there's going to be 4 scenarios reviewed by each River Basin Council. We'll do the current surface water use. We'll use permitted and registered water use. We'll do a moderate water demand projection and a high water demand projection. And all of this information will be fed into the model to understand how demand is going to change over time, looking at variables of growing population and how water is currently used and how we can project it in the future. So the scenarios are going to focus primarily on water demand side instead of the supply side. There will also be options to test additional scenarios, like something that we could think about as a big user that we know that's going to come in. How might that affect the amount of water if it's in a particular stream? Is that correct to say?
Yeah, Jason had a question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you were. No, you just.
So some of the other river basin councils have run paired flow model. Are we going to do that here? Do you know?
Yes, we will. That was kind of an optional one, but we've not had done. So unimpaired flow model means, what if there was no reservoirs, withdrawals, and discharges in the system? What if it was, think like 1700s or something, before man got in and put dams in and started pulling out water and returning water? What did the system look like? It would be completely different, obviously, here in Santee, because it's so heavily regulated. So I don't know how useful that analysis is going to be, but we can do it. It's an easy model simulation.
Good way to prove that reservoirs are affected.
That's one way to do that. Yeah. And I'll mention too that the reason we do a moderate and a high water demand projection is to kind of put a range on projections. There's a lot of uncertainty how much water we'll need 50 years into the future. We don't know what growth is going to be like. We don't know if the trend in per capita water use, which has generally been declining over the years because of more water efficient appliances and more conservation and just practices, is going to continue, if it's going to start to level out. So we put a band on it. We do a moderate and a high one. But for the planning framework, we're going to make our decisions based on the more conservative one, which is the high demand scenario. And that assumes pretty strong economic growth, the high end of the population projections. And like on the irrigation side, it assumes that it's hot out, right? It's dry and hot. So you're irrigating a lot. So we're trying to be conservative and develop strategies around that more conservative scenario, the high irrigating scenario.
With the permitted and registered water use, is that that's not what's on the permits, it's what's actually used? Because I know that varies.
No, the permitted and registered is actually what's on the permit, so, and that's what, Leanne's group is permitting. So the current water use is actually how much water has been used, so, we've got this reported use is what the user reports, self-reported by, the user. And then, but their permit would be larger to allow for fluctuations in water. And that's, evaluated, by Leanne's group, if she could speak more to that.
Well, so we can get into that. I'm sure I'll give a presentation on it at some point, but yeah, so for surface water, the difference between permanent, registered, permanent, are all users that are not agricultural registrations. All permanent users that were in place before the law and regular established got grandfathered permits, and those were all based on their intake capacity. So a lot of times their permit volume is greater than their need, but it does a lot of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so that's why we try to capture as much information and as much that you would need to understand, how to move forward with forming recommendations.
Yeah, David.
Yes, David.
Yeah, the question about, we have a lot of groundwater wells that serve waterfowl impoundments. So those wells are permitted under the wildlife exemption. I have told landowners there's no requirement to report the use.
There's not.
Yeah. So then it becomes even more interesting because those reservoirs or those impoundments, the water's in them and then it drains back into the surface water system. So it goes from groundwater into the impoundment, some evaporation loss, but then eventually drain back into the system. So there's another thing to account for.
Those are shallower wells too, right?
There's a lot of deep Middendorf wells.
Really?
Yeah. There's a lot of 800-foot wells.
What county?
Where is this located?
Clarendon County.
Clarendon County, okay, good to know. All right, we're always looking for wells to monitor.
Well, we're not required to buy it.
Okay. Okay. So for the Santee groundwater assessment and for all the assessments that we've done across the coastal plain, the exception of the Edisto, we are not using a model. And so we are doing a desktop we just completed in the PD Basin. So that assessment is going to, and it did include a review of all of the groundwater data, groundwater level data from the SCDES, and we also have some USGS wells that we can use. Our potentiometric maps, one of them is shown here, where we go out, and I'll be talking a lot about these maps. And we go out during fall. We're actually doing a hop around right now, and we'll measure over 100 wells all within a month, and then we'll turn those into an elevation to make a map so that we can evaluate changes in storage over time. We'll be looking at relevant USGS and SCDES studies that have been conducted. There have been studies looking at the in the Mount Pleasant area and some other studies that we can rely on. The permitting section for SCDES has management plans because the entire coastal plain is in a capacity use area. So when you're 3 million gallons a month, you're required to have a permit. These waterfowl impoundments, they're excluded from this. They don't report, but the water use is reported and it's compiled into a report, and every 5 years there's another evaluation. So we'll rely on information from that as well. Groundwater withdrawal data, lots of reported data that we can rely on through the permitting databases. And what we'll do is he will take the projections and we'll understand where water use has occurred what the projections by the county or by the aquifers tell us, and we can assert that water use will probably continue. And we could say that it may increase here or it may decline here. And so we can, with some confidence, make some broad recommendations or make some broad assertions about where we see groundwater areas of concern could develop, where we could see that continued water use could pull water levels down. And so our team in the hydrology section and the permitting section will be looking at that, so that's how we'll approach that. Now, we really want the groundwater model, and when we get into this implementation phase and later iterations of planning, we are still working on completing the model, but we don't want to have a bad model. We want to have a good model, so we're going to wait until the model's ready, and then we'll be able to run additional, we'll be able to run the scenarios that we plan to run, and then we can look at additional scenarios. Like I mentioned, if we know that a large groundwater user may be coming in, and we can evaluate that. And that model, we'll be using as a future decision-making tool. I'll describe what the model did in the Edisto Basin, and we kind of talked about this, but with relation to implementation earlier. The model in Lexington County identified that with continued groundwater withdrawals in the McQueen Branch aquifer that we would see groundwater area concern. And so then we took that information and we reached out to public lands in Lexington County, and we're actively trying to put in a well, going through the process of getting that done right now. So that's the type of information that we'll be able to garner from doing this process. Okay. All right. Okay. So y'all aren't going to do this alone. You have people supporting you. So we've got contractors that are being hired by SCDES. We have meeting facilitation, surface water technical support, and basin plan report writing is going to be done by CDM Smith. John and his associates will be working on that. Meeting coordination will largely be done by SCDES and also CDM Smith. Then also the other state and federal agencies can assist. We've got SCORE here, the Forestry Commission. You can request agencies to serve as advisors to get more information that you need, that you don't feel that you're getting right now, or if you want to hear more about the reservoir operations, and we need to have a presentation from the Army Corps of Engineers. We can take that and invite them to come talk to us. We can invite SCORE to come talk to us, the Office of Resilience. And then, as I said, there are some members from other agencies here. These are open meetings, and they're always be able to attend meetings and subcommittee meetings as requested, sorry. Also, we can request input from outside advisors. This could be different towns, localities, environmental groups can come in, academic agencies. Clemson has talked to us about irrigation precision before, so we can have that type of information too. And then we'll continue to provide oversight. Our role will be to educate, and especially with groundwater and surface water resources. Okay, so this is our final basin, and so we're downstream of the Saluda, Broad, and Catawba, so there'll be coordination with other planning agencies. They've been through this planning process. The Broad has completed theirs. The Catawba is being run by the Catawba Water group, and then it's the Saluda done. We're not done with Saluda. No. And so the planning framework recognizes the existence of other formal planning groups, and we should coordinate with those. So we can form an interbasin river council, to be made up of every members from this group and then other adjoining groups. And you can communicate and coordinate mutual interests, and if there's any conflicts there, we can also discuss this. Now, we understand this is a really accelerated time schedule, so getting that on board would have to take place relatively soon. Guidelines for stakeholder and public participation are described in the planning framework. We're going to have public meetings, 3 to 4 for each basin. We did have 2 for this. We would ideally have more public meetings at the end after we've completed the plan within this group. We'll have a draft, and then we have an opportunity for the public to comment on it, and then we would have a final public meeting. Like I said a minute ago, the RBC meetings are all open to the public and include a comment period for public members or from federal or state agencies. Or the public. Okay, so this is the implementation that we were talking about earlier. So these are not intended to be static documents that we just like finish it up, put it on the shelf and be like, yeah, did that. So each basin plan as outlined by the framework is required to have a 5-year implementation plan. And that's in chapter 10. John was talking about this in the table of contents. So those objectives are based on the recommendations from water management strategies and other recommendations that y'all made within the plan. We will have to schedule it and have to determine a budget. Who would participate on this? Who would the other groups be that would formalize this process? And these RBCs would be expected to meet annually between the successive iterations of the river basin, but the frequency is actually dependent upon objectives and the available funding that we have. The challenge is, I think I've said it 3 times now, funding. So we'll also need to have broader stakeholder buy-in, and there's no regulatory authority over this. So, it's up to y'all to keep this basin going along with oversight from DES. Okay, we have a website. We've got water planning. All of our water planning activities are documented on this website. An overview, you can find a framework, and you can find each river basin has its own page, including the Santee, and that's where you find announcements, calendar events, all of the water planning documents. Every single one of our recorded presentations is on there. All of the presentations that you see are on there. The RBC meeting material, the agendas, you'll find all of that. It should be posted pretty shortly after the conclusion of each meeting. This is just the website for each one of those, but if you just go to SCDES hydrology, you should be on our landing page. Okay, that was it. Thank you very much. If y'all have questions, I'm going to be helping Scott a good bit during this process, so I wanted to get up here and introduce myself. My specialty is groundwater, so I will be sharing and communicating a lot of groundwater science to you, and that's it. Thank you.
Great. All right. I need to apologize to Hickson because I told him right after lunch I would let him introduce himself since he came in a little late, and then I completely forgot. So,
there was much more important stuff to talk about than me.
Yeah, Hickson, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you. As you mentioned, my name is Hickson Cott. I'm the Director of Economic Development in Williamsburg County, South Carolina. I think one of the things that I remember you asking me to introduce is why was I interested in this? One of the reasons why this caught my attention is I think Williamsburg County is a county that is often left out of a lot of these discussions that go on. And some of that is just its population size, it's proportionate to some extent. But I thought this was a great opportunity for us to come together and plan together where I think we can all participate. And one of the things, my background was in economic development and politics at a regional level, but one of the main things I learned was, your neighbors really aren't going to change anytime soon. So you get really 2 choices. You can either cut ties or you can decide to work together. And I decided I want to work together with the folks in this region. And on a personal note, I grew up in Florence County, worked at my dad's sawmill growing up in the summers, and so the outdoors is I think you can't put a number on how important it is for not only for the growth of the state but also for the culture and what this actually means to us to be South Carolinians. So a little bit patriotic, a little bit professional. What was the other thing? An interesting fact about myself. I understand this is a very Clemson-heavy room, so my suggested interesting fact about myself was that I went to Wofford College. So, a room full of specialists, I decided to take the liberal arts route. But I think that pretty much covers the questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited to meet all of you and get to know you all.
Okay, let's move on. Anybody need a break before we jump into the next topic? Good. Okay, feel free to get up and refresh your drink or something. I'm going to dive a little bit more into what we need to cover and how we're going to do this, and I want your input during this discussion. Because again, we're working in an abbreviated schedule, so we're going to have to cut some things that we normally cover. I want to give you some opportunities to weigh in on what we cut. The planning process, if you look at the framework, is divided into 4 phases. The first phase is all about learning. Learning from the experts and learning from each other. So a lot of how we learn from each other in phase 1 is we take field trips. We've done a lot of field trips, and the feedback we get from the RBC is that those are some of the most useful aspects. Some field trip examples we could do in this basin are to go see Santee Cooper's facilities, or to go see Charleston Water Systems facilities. Some of the ag field trips we've done have been the most interesting to me, and I think most of the other RBC members, because they generally don't know much about ag water use. So learning about how you conserve water and how you do audits of sprinkler systems, how you return water and reuse it is very useful. So be thinking about that. What we'll probably try to do is schedule some field trips in between meetings, given that we're time constrained. And they'd be optional. If you can attend them, great, we encourage you to, but we want to at least make the opportunity available. It's just that it's going to be tough to fit them in. We're still going to try to do them. So we're looking for feedback from you all as to what you want to see, what you think would be useful for other community members to see. I'll give you some more examples later on. So again, phase 1, next month we're going to work on the vision and goal statement. In other basins we've spent 2, sometimes 3 meetings doing that, and we're going to have to do that in like a half a meeting or less. We just need to move on. With the smaller group, I think we can come up with a concise vision statement and some goals, especially by looking at what the other RBCs have come up with, but they're all very similar. We'll do a review of the water demand projections, which DES are working on now, and we'll become more familiar with the modeling tools. That's what we do in phase 1. The focus is learning. What do we expect of you in phase 1? Ask a lot of questions like we're doing today. If you need more information, let us know. If we're moving too fast, let us know. We'll probably say, tough, we've got to get this done in 10 months. But let us know anyway. Select an alternate. I mentioned that already. Try to find an alternate so that if you want to go on vacation, you'll have a representative there. I know that's easier for some of you folks that have larger organizations, but more difficult for some smaller operations. If you can't find an alternate, it's not the end of the world, but it will help you continue to represent your interests at each meeting. Okay, phase 1 topics. This is where I want some input from you. Jason and Brandon, you all can weigh in on what you thought was useful and what you thought, yeah, that was interesting, but wasn't critical to the River Basin planning process. Those topics that I put there with the green checks are topics that, in conversations with DES and the planning team, we think are probably critical. We think we want to include them. For example, everybody seems to like Hope Mazel, the state climatologist, her presentation on climatology statewide and for your basin, and her discussion of drought. Drought is critical. I mean, that's the whole reason we're putting these plans together. We're not putting this together for flooding. We're putting it together for when there's not enough water. So hearing from Hope is very important. Demand projections, we need to cover that. Groundwater management plans and capacity use areas. Leanne, you want to talk about that or somebody else? Probably Leanne.
I'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. You need to learn about that. Some of you already know that at the back of your hand, but some of you might not even know what CUA means or what a groundwater management plan is. So we're going to present that. We've had good feedback from folks that learned from Nathan Smith and Clemson about agribusiness. He comes in and explains why agriculture is important and backs it up with numbers. So we'll probably try to get Nathan to come talk and focus on agribusiness in this basin. I think we really want to learn about Santee Cooper's reservoir operations, power operations, and everything associated with that. So we're going to rely on you, Michael, to tell us, should that be a combination meeting where we meet here in the morning and go through some stuff for an hour and then we take a trip out and we see a facility or two? That's an option, but I think that'll be critical. We might want to learn about Charleston Water's systems.
One possibility, John, is Santee Cooper and Charleston Water co-presented at in 2023 the United States Society of Dams workshop, and it was fairly high level, but it was bare bones how are the two systems operated. And I think that would be pretty cool to a lot of the questions that we have, and a lot of pretty pictures and cool history too. So, and either I could do that here, or if we want to try to combine the Charleston water portion with a tour of the Hanahan water treatment plant, we could potentially do that.
Okay. Now we can do, if you have a few minutes after we wrap up here today, if you want to talk about the history of the basin, the first interbasin transfer that happened between the Santee and the Cooper Rivers was the old Santee Canal, right down the hill. So if you have a few minutes to walk in the woods, that's kind of a neat little thing.
You have some different shoes for me?
There's 12, but I could probably.
Dave, you know what, we have a wildlife education centers, we have facilities, but if you want to do a meeting where you can meet at our facility, see the wildlife use side, and then Mickey's Farm just down the road, the agricultural side, that could all be done in one swoop.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I'd be happy to host a meeting there.
We'll talk about that. That's exactly what we kind of like to do, is mix up the meeting locations and couple them up with field trips if we can. Yeah. Good idea. Some topics that we've generally covered in all the other basins that we may not have time for, but I want your feedback. There's folks from DNR that can talk about marine resources. There's folks from DNR that can talk about freshwater aquatic resources and how they manage freshwater systems.
I think that could be, couldn't that be incorporated in the Santee Cooper Reservoir? I mean, the St. Stephen's Fish Lagoon? Include a visit to the St. Stephen's Fish Lagoon?
It's a neat field trip for sure. And we're hitting the right time of year for it to be pertinent. The shad area.
Does they still count the shad through the line? They still do that?
We're working on getting that implemented as well. Yeah.
So it used to be an annual thing.
Yeah.
And we could show the eel ramps at the environmental tenants on the Blue Street Piece of Park and too, turn that to a river.
Those are good ideas. Other basins have heard about from SCORE and the resilience plan, and I'm sure you'd be willing to give a presentation on resilience elements. Yep. So that's an option. Typically, Toby Feaster with the USGS comes and talks about how they monitor flows, streams and rivers and lake levels, and overview low flow stats. That's very interesting. A lot of people enjoy that in this basin just because it's so heavily regulated, and the fact that Toby's maybe retiring soon, and the fact that, I don't know, we're trying to cut some topics, not add topics. We might not do that one, but what do you all think? It sounds like you need it, or you could do without it?
It's always easier to cut more and then scale up if you got extra time, right?
Yeah, we won't have extra time, but so those are some of the topics that we've heard from. I think in the Edisto Basin, we had Josh Eagle from South USC kind of talk about water law. He just did a presentation on Water SC. I would encourage you to listen to that recording rather than have him come here to talk about water law. What else have we done that's not?
Could you send us that link to that?
Sure. Yeah.
Great.
I guess the one concern I have is you're cutting out all the environmental stuff. You're cutting out marine resources, you're cutting out freshwater aquatic resources, and then you're cutting out the things that relate to environmental issues.
Yeah, good point.
And I think that that's a wise decision.
Yeah. So the question marks weren't to cut them; they were wanting to get your feedback, and your feedback certainly good suggestion.
I would just be concerned about that. You know, the effect on our coastal fisheries and of water and our freshwater fisheries and aquatic resource, and that gets back to waterfowl issues and whatnot. And management those are critical water use issues that I think are very important to go.
Right. So what I'm going to get briefly.
It's kind of funny that I think you mentioned that we don't have the recreational interest represented here yet, and that's, talking about maybe water basin, the biggest recreational district, if I had to guess.
Can you still water for that industries and good for the committee?
It'd be great if we had all those categories
Maybe
represented.
we can ask people, if we all know people who operate outboarding kayaking companies.
Scott,
Hope to have a few members over the next couple of months, city council, not only in water-based recreation, but some of the other categories that are not really fit with other patterns. So we do hope that, yeah, those people I mentioned in the process, we think would be a good fit. Encourage them to reach out for sure. It'll get to a point though where adding some new probably hinder the process instead of helping. So, at least for a couple of months, we'll keep it open.
one option we've talked about is possibly doing some, more than just meeting once a month, but having some like 1 hour sessions where we can have one-off presentations that they're probably virtual. So it doesn't take up your time to drive here, just log in, we'll have Nathan Smith talk about agribusiness or something, and it'll just be a 1 hour period that we try to schedule when most people can make it. That's one way to try to fit all this in. We don't cut anything. Would everybody be generally amenable to that if we can find time in between meetings?
Sure, that's a great solution, yeah. Well, the recommendation there, you wouldn't have to all be on at the same time. It could be recorded and then we could come back when we had time to look at it.
Exactly, yeah. You won't be able to answer questions, but if you have questions, we could always follow up with the presenter after you watch the recording. If you're amenable to that, we may try to schedule it.
It's like Santee Cooper Country, which is the arm that promotes recreational use on the lake system. Would they be someone to ask to be on this? I mean, yeah.
And as it relates to, freshwater resources and wildlife on the reservoir, some of what we have to do from a license compliance perspective. And so if we get short on time, I'm happy to cover some of that as well. It's might not be directed from the folks at ER, but we work pretty closely with them on all that stuff. So happy to address as much of that as I can as we have time.
3 different basins, we've done paddle trips too. Broad, paddled on the Edisto, and a group paddled on the Silver River recently.
Well, I mean, of course, there's paddling on Cedar Creek at Conway National Park, but people also really like Sparkleberry Swamp farther down the stream too. So that those would be obvious places.
Yeah, I was gonna say the Water Beach right off 402 here, just on place 2. It falls part of the Blue Ways thing. Really good resource.
So if there's interest, we may try to schedule an extra trip where we can get on the water come springtime or something. Takes a little extra coordination, but that'd be great if somebody's interested in picking that up.
It used to be great paddling up around river. It's still, we used to duck hunt up there. So
There's actually a couple kayak companies.
There's a lot of great kayaking out of up in Sparkleberry. We actually do it with our youth programs now.
And they've had several kayak fishing tournaments. They have several of them here.
Any other field trips that y'all think would be useful? Alan, anything you think we want to see at Mount Pleasant or?
Not that you couldn't see it chalk and water.
Any other ideas?
We plan to move one of these meetings at our Jeffries hydroelectric station on Cooper. We've got a nice meeting space there, so we could maybe knock out both the meeting in all to the hydro facility in the same day. But that's something that would be of interest.
It probably would be, yeah. We've done hydro facilities in 3 other basins at least. I think people enjoy that. So,
okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll take your feedback into consideration when our planning team meets again and try to come up with an approach to fitting a lot of this in the first 3 months or less. Oops. Okay, second phase. That's where we start using the models to assess supply availability versus projected demands. We also look at the safe yield of reservoirs. And in the other basins, we've done analysis working with USGS and Clemson to look at flow ecology relationships. We probably won't have time, and we won't do that in this basin for two reasons. One, time, and the second one is that they generally do this, or they exclusively do this on wadable streams. So the smaller streams that feed into the larger ones. In this basin, there's not a lot of opportunity, and there may not be enough data to support it. So we're probably not going to get to do that. If you want to learn more about that, you could take a look at the work that was done in the Edisto and the Broad. There's a description in chapter 5 and 6 about those flow ecology relationships and how they leverage DES data and DNR data that's been collected over the last 30 years on fish and macroinvertebrates, and then use modeling to look into the future and see what the impacts to those might be under future scenarios, the same scenarios we talked about before. Okay, phase 2 answers the question, is there enough water to meet current future needs? That's where we really dive into the meat of the analysis. What we expect of you in phase 2 is to look critically at the surface water model inputs and the outputs, ask questions, tell us if something's not being represented reasonably, and request additional analysis where warranted. So if you think we need to do some other scenarios that we haven't talked about or haven't looked at, is there opportunity to say, when we look at a drought that's more severe than we've seen in the past? Some of the other basins have said that. Actually, we've augmented the model to more easily do that, to like look at extended droughts. What if the drought of 2007 and 2008, which is the drought of record, the most severe drought in some of the parts of the state, extended for another year or another 2 years? What might that look like in terms of supply availability and impacts on creating shortages? So you can do that type of scenario. So we'll talk more about that in phase 2. I'm just going to skip by this. This is an example from the Broad. That's the model. Phase 3, that's where we take the information that we've learned from phase 1 and modeling in phase 2 to say, okay, what management strategies do we need to do? In some of the basins, we have not identified any shortage or significant gaps. In Saluda, in the upper Savannah, they've got a lot of water for the next 50 years, so there was no really large shortages or even minor shortages that couldn't be easily rectified with something that is a water management strategy. So that phase is pretty easy. We skipped quickly through that. We talked about water management strategies that may be needed if conditions change. So we talked about uncertainty and the need for an adaptive type of plan, but we didn't have to come up with explicit strategies to fill gaps. In this basin, I'm just thinking that, there's a lot of water coming in from the Saluda, the Broad, the Catawba. For the most part, you may see the same results that we saw in the Saluda and the upper Savannah. You've got a lot of water on the surface water side. Groundwater may be a little different, but we'll have to talk about that. But let's see what the model says when we put in the projections. What we expect from you in phase 3 is give us direction on what strategies to evaluate. Many of the strategies we can evaluate using the model, some we can't, but we'll look at it. Identify strategies that support a water conservation, water efficiency ethic. That's important. We're trying to stress that in every basin. Recognize the potential for changing conditions. So we need to think outside of historical precipitation and water availability. Consider what if we have a longer drought, or what if we get, like Scott alluded to earlier, a lot more high intensity rainfall events, then separated by periods where there's no rain at all. That seems to be the trend. What if that trend continues? What if land development changes such that it impacts the flow regime? That's been a consideration for a lot of the upstate basins, where there's a lot of development and they're seeing a lot more flashiness of the streams. So higher flows after rain events and then lower flows in between rain events because of less recharge. Is that something you want to consider? So that's an opportunity too. In phase 3 too, you'll start to begin to review draft chapters of the plan. In fact, we've already started writing chapters 2 and 3, which is just introductory information. And we may get those out to you in the next 3 months or so to begin to review. Examples from phase 3, that's where we can do what we call what-if simulations to answer your questions. Like for example, in the Broad, we said, well, what if the drought management plans that each one of the water utilities has What if those plans were triggered? What if they got into drought stages and the reductions that are identified in those plans for demand one or 2 months. So we'll have to be pretty targeted on what recommendations we would make, and then maybe kick the can down the road a little bit for the next update plan for certain things, just realizing that we can't tackle everything. We can't solve all the problems in this abbreviated 10 months. Phase 4 is when we put the plan together, basically, get public input and wrap it all up. So that'll be the challenge, wrap all this up.
Any other items, then a lot of public involvement? Curious.
Not a lot. So it kind of started at the NSO, like we had 130 people at the first meeting, and then quickly kind of dropped off. That was during COVID. Now we have generally 3 or 4 guests attend each meeting in the council, but typically there's folks like the SCORE and forestry, interested parties. The general public hasn't shown a whole lot of interest, to be honest. When we've done the public meetings to roll out the draft plan, they've been, I'd say, sparsely attended. Maybe the word's just not out as well, but
You need to move on your.
you need a draft.
Yeah, unless there's some controversy. I think the top, the information's pretty heavy too for the drop-ins. It's pretty hard to get kind of.
Yeah. So in phase 4, we focus on achieving consensus. We write the plan. We need timely decisions from you all. We need your recommendations. That's about it. Important things to remember, this is an ongoing process. I've been emphasizing that as we go, especially in this basin. You're going to realize that you're going to have to push some things off until later, but we'll get as much done as we can. I highlighted this because we do spend a lot of time, and the other stuff we spend a lot of time talking about this, and the other basins, to some extent, we've spent a lot of time on how can we change law and regulation to make things better. And it's hard to reach consensus on that. It's all great discussion, and feedback, I think, has been very informative. But I don't think we're going to solve anything, especially in our abbreviated time that we're here. We'll try to talk about what we see as the most important issues with improving law and regulation, but we just can't get into the weeds like we did in some of the other basins. No offense to Jason, but he had some great ideas. Jason is a stats guy, and he really got into some great comparisons, good suggestions that we've actually presented and talked about in some of the other basins. But I don't think we're going to have a whole lot of time to do the same thing here. This process is stakeholder driven, so we want to leverage your knowledge and develop this plan. And then we want to make sure this is a transparent process. If there's something that you want from us, you want to see the data or whatever, let us know. There's no intent to hide anything or hold anything back. So. Okay, I am a little behind, so I'm going to just touch on the important parts of the bylaws, which you can read at the back of the planning framework. It's, I don't know, 10, 12-page section. They define how we make decisions, the membership, the appointment procedures, how you operate. You can modify the bylaws, but that hasn't even come up in the other River Basin councils. I don't think there's a need for it, so we're not even going to talk about it, but just know that if you have a suggestion of how we operate that you want to change, you let us know, we can consider it. Membership and attendance, I'm just going to suggest that even though the planning framework says you shouldn't miss more than 2 meetings over a rolling 12-month period, and in your case, you're going to be meeting only about 10 months, try not to miss the meetings. Some RBC members have had to miss 3, 4, 5 meetings, and we haven't kicked them out, and the RBC hasn't voted to kick them out. But when they miss 10 to 12 out of 20 meetings, then we've actually voted to remove them because they haven't been engaged in the process and they shouldn't be making decisions.
Can we have the alternate here? Like,
yes.
You know, I'd love to, I have an assistant that would.
Yeah, when you have an alternate here, that counts as attending, so you don't have.
I would love to have them at every meeting when I'm here, just to,
yeah.
If that's okay.
Yep. But I don't see that's going to be a problem with this one since we're only meeting 10 to 12 times, maybe some virtual meetings in between. I hope you all can stay engaged through October, November when we wrap things up. Usually we see folks kind of drop off after the first year because life happens and people get busy. Priorities change, jobs change, but with this council, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Did we settle on a day and time or a day of the week and time?
We're going to talk about that in the meeting. Removal, we've never really had to remove anybody from the council, except in one case when they moved out of the council, they moved from like the Edisto to the PD and took a job in the PD. They didn't represent the Edisto anymore. And that entity that was in the Edisto, so had to remove them from the council, but otherwise, I don't expect this is going to come up, especially in our short time that we're going to be meeting this first phase. You're going to be drawing term lengths, 2, 3, or 4 years. We'll probably do that at the next meeting since we're running a little bit behind. And I'll talk about that more at the next meeting, but the framework calls for a staggered membership, so it doesn't all turn over at once. We don't want the whole RBC turning over after 2 years or 3 years. That's why we stagger it and you get 2, 3, or 4 year periods. If you can't do the 2, 3, or 4 years, obviously that's fine. We'll try to fill in with someone else when you're lowering your staggered work. You can request to stay on after 2, 3, or 4 years if you want to keep being part of the process. You can't do more than 3 consecutive terms. Code of conduct, just behave, respect other opinions, no fist fights, operate in good faith. This hasn't really been a problem. There's been some, I'd say, sort of heated discussions, but it's all usually been very professional. Just keep it professional. We need to elect a chair and a vice chair. You'll serve as the kind of the spokesperson. We don't ask a lot more from you other than you help provide direction. The chair and the vice chair have to be different water use sectors. Knowing that, if you feel comfortable selecting a chair at the next meeting, you want to wait for 2 or 3 meetings, what's your feedback?
Sooner the better, probably because of the timeline being so tight.
Yeah. Okay.
Try for next meeting.
Try for next meeting. Okay. So my ask of you, if you want to try for next meeting, if you're interested in being the chair or the vice chair, talk to someone else on the RBC and ask them to nominate you. Send me an email and say, hey, I would like to serve as the chair or the vice chair. And then at the next meeting, I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you want, to just say a few words why you wouldn't be the chair or the vice chair and do an open vote. It's been a pretty easy process in the other councils, but we do need a chair and a vice chair, so I hope we have at least 2 volunteers. It should be by majority vote. Any questions about that? Okay. Most of our meetings are regular meetings. We could do closed meetings to talk about sensitive topics. We've never had to do that in any of the councils. I don't think we're gonna have to do that here. We could do special meetings. I guess you could consider those virtual meetings that we've talked about as special meetings. So we've got flexibility. We make decisions by consensus. We've already talked about this. Everybody kind of understand how we're going to be making decisions. We're not going to be making a lot of decisions until we get 3, 4, 5, 6 months into it. The framework and the bylaws talk about majority vote typically. Sometimes we'll do a super majority vote, which is 2/3 if we're trying to remove a member or reinstate a member, but I don't expect that's going to happen. When we finally prepare the draft River Basin plan, you all have had a chance to review it. Your comments have been incorporated, hopefully to your satisfaction. Then we're going to do a vote, and the vote goes like this. There's a step 1 where you give it a 5-point scale, and you say, I fully endorse this. I like the plan, pretty comfortable with everything that's in it. I give it a 1. You say 2, if you give it, your endorsement, but you've got a few points of contention, minor, you can live with it. 3, you've got some major points of contention, but you still support the plan. You realize that you've got to, make some concessions, you still support it. Or 4 or 5, you're not too happy with it. You didn't get what you want. You don't think it reflects your water use sector or your interests. 5 is had enough. I'm out of here. At the same time, then we put the draft plan out for public comment. We get comments. We attempt to address comments. There haven't been a lot of public comments on the plans that have been released so far. Only a handful, maybe 3 or 4 submitted for the Edisto and the Broad each. We address the comments and we put out a final plan. You vote again on the final plan, but not using that 5-point scale. You just say, I approve the plan or I don't approve the plan. So that's how we wrap things up. We can do subcommittees if we need to. We did some in the Edisto. The PD did some to focus on like surface water modeling or groundwater issues. The other RBCs haven't needed to do subcommittees. This is a smaller group, so I don't know that you'll need to, but if you want one, you can, especially if there's like a particular issue or topic you want to dive into and a couple people have special interests and it might help advance the process, then you can recommend, let's do a subcommittee and report back to the full RBC after we've figured this out. So there may be an opportunity to do it, but again, it's up to you. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Brooke already talked about inter-river basin councils. We may try to facilitate a couple inter-river basin council meetings, perhaps with the basin councils that feed into this, Catawba, Broad, Saluda. For example, you might want to talk to them about some of the recommendations that they've developed and how those impact flows into your basin. So maybe you have an inter-river basin council, especially to look at some of their strategies or maybe to come to more consensus on which strategies you think are appropriate, knowing that you might want to mirror what the Saluda or Broad or Catawba did. So different reasons why we could have these inter-river basin council meetings. Did we lose it? Or no, somebody joined.
Yeah, Brandon's from there.
Okay. I went through that really quickly. Everybody comfortable with the bylaws, how we operate? Any questions about that? Yeah, all right. I'm going to skip the term lengths thing just because we're a little bit behind and I want to save time for discussions, which is you all getting into small groups and talking about what priorities you have for the basin. So I'm going to split you up into 2 groups, all right? Kind of right down the middle of the room. So Mickey, you're going to meet with these 6 folks here. You guys might want to move your table chairs around. And then Alan, you're going to meet with these folks. We're going to have 2 groups. I want you to spend time kind of answering these questions. The reason we're doing this is we want to start to learn what your interests are, what your priorities are. This will really help make the vision statement and the goals be developed a lot quicker and easier at the next meeting. This will also help us set us up for when we write the plan and we get into recommendations. We'll know what to focus on. So what do you want to preserve, protect, and important to you, for example? What's really important to you? Get into the weeds. You have specific things that you're interested in that you want to preserve or protect or augment. Now's the time. What are the outcomes you want to encourage? Is it balanced and equitable water use? Is it building resilience? Is it building more water supply? Is it figuring out how we can accommodate growth? I mean, maybe it's all those things. What's important to you? Once you decide. What kind of actions do you want to promote? Start thinking about what's important with regard to water management strategies. What can you get behind? And then how do you want the basin to be managed? A lot of these questions kind of run together, but they're meant to get you thinking about this in general and get your priorities out there. So don't feel like you have to have an answer for every one necessarily, but we'll kind of go through them after you've met for 150. We're going to do this, we're going to 3 today. We're going to do this for about a half hour. We're going to have a report out. So, your group 1, your group 2, we're going to have a couple online folks. Riley is still online, maybe Brandon. Yeah.
Are you guessing that? Sure.
Yeah, it's just gonna be a discussion. You're taking your notes, and you're gonna one person report me. So make sure the first thing you do is say, there you go, report back. Yeah. You're cool.
All right, please wrap up your discussions and we're gonna report that. Good.
Yeah.
All right, so group one, here's on my right, group one, who's your vote? Who's your vote for group two?
That's it, Nick. I'll
John? Okay. And online group, with Riley and Brandon and Aiden's there who facilitate, who's gonna speak for your online group?
I was going to.
Okay. So hang with us, Brandon. We'll start with group one. And we'll go question by question, but it'll all kind of run together. So go ahead.
We didn't get questions. Just add just, I guess, of the discussion of what were any concerns. So, I'll just say it all. It won't necessarily feed into each question. Okay. So I think the first thing is, before really being able to answer these questions effectively, not that that's something that's talking about them, but knowing how limited, are we limited and how limited we are determines the answer to some of these questions in the future. So, you know, someone's like to get asked these now and then later and see how it changes. So that was just a conversation. We feel it's important to protect the traditional uses of water, being recreation, hunting, that kind of thing.
Well, not a traditional work in your mind. That's okay. That's catalyst users. So like there's also big manufacturing processes which pull massive amounts of water as a catalyst. So it's more not necessarily focusing in one industry, but large user pockets. That's what you're concerned about. Like and I guess in this case it would be maybe a data center or some large industry that comes in.
Well, large new users that would then affect the traditional use of, you know, what for power generation or public drinking water. You know, even have certain types of, like, yeah, I know, like a state farm uses a lot more water than Michigan does.
And then I'll just go into I'm just gonna call them data centers, but I hear from better, but they're concerned about both water usage and their power consumption, which goes back to water. Preserving water for recreation. That also has an economic impact in a lot of areas, especially your rural areas that have businesses that rely on use of the water. Agriculture, especially as an economic impact. And then the last, we talked about public water supply because, Jason and I have to talk about public water. I was asking about the saltwater intrusion and what the status of that was. And so we started talking about interconnectivity, knowing the interconnectivity of your water suppliers in the region, even interbasin transfers. And then
So you said knowing that, are you saying you're encouraging more interconnectivity as well, or you just want to better understand what systems are connected to other systems?
I think the first thing you do is find out what the current status is, and then look for, is there more than for interconnectivity between water supplies?
Yeah. It's an interesting point, because this came up in the broad. There's a lot of local utilities there, smaller utilities, all kind of in the upstate, and I just assumed that they all knew who was connected to who. They had emergency interconnections, and we started talking about it at one of the meetings, and I remember who it was, and I don't want to pick on any of them, but they're like, well, I think we have an interconnection with JWD, but I'm not sure. I have to look. That came up over and over again. Well, I think you still have a 6-inch connection here or a small connection here, but I don't think you've ever used it. I'm not sure it still operates. There's a lot of unknowns and uncertainties about where there was interconnections and what level of resilience they had if they had a catastrophic failure somewhere, and could they get water from a neighboring utility, which I assume they all knew, had plans in place.
Those ones are entry costs, 1840.
Yeah.
So if you're not using them, they're not getting used to you when you need them.
Right. So it's a little like, but that's.
Yeah, and then I'm trying not to get too much into water quality. I'm a water quality person, but the groundwater and the saltwater intrusion, if that's an issue. If it's not usable, then it's not available.
That, that recreation side gets to all the environmental issues, it's, our fisheries, fishing depends on, a good fishery, right? Strong environmental, looking at the environmental issues so that we have fish and wildlife.
And then the last thing I have is understanding the regulatory restrictions for minimum flows that, for instance, Santee Cooper has to abide by those restrictions no matter what. And so that's important to understand and consider during this process.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
Yep. Okay. Group 2.
Okay. Let's see, again, in no particular, there was, I think this was in line with maintaining traditional uses, except it's a traditional power and industrial uses. There was some interest in making sure that Santee Cooper project is looked at or and maintained much as it currently is. We did identify one threat to the system. Again, this is water quality, I guess, but the Pinewood landfill, here Pinewood or here Spartanburg. Let's see, a general interest in protecting groundwater. So we just had a case study where, the 2024 drought, you talked about these flash droughts, and it was more severe than people realized, and it resulted in a 5-fold increase in the amount of water used in a single well. Of course, there's that results in as much as an increase in power usage as well. You mentioned recreational uses. Make sure there's better coordination upstream and downstream. We cited a large example of that where there's big power. Previously, I don't know if it still is true anymore, but it didn't necessarily coordinate well with downstream customers. And I had a mini example of that that affected recreation use at Conway National Park. This actually was immediately upstream.
And are you talking about flows coming from the Catawba?
Yeah, it'd be flows coming from Catawba in case of deep power. I think we were interested in encouraging groundwater recharge. That was a theme that came up a lot.
So expand on that. When you say encouraging groundwater recharge, do you mean land use changes, supporting land?
I think that, yeah, I mean, I see it mostly through land use changes personally, but we're talking about Carolina Bays and the role they play in that charge. And then, issues we're also interested in were public education and then water conservation and then stormwater runoff, use of wise use of irrigation systems. Both, I think the examples people cited, they were thinking more about domestic water use. Are there other things you hit along?
Well, and back to the Mickey situation with the 2024 drought, extremes, like when we experience these extremes, what is plan B?
Are we prepared to handle?
Are we prepared? Super drought.
And I'll tell you an example I gave you, it's our stuff. Last year in 23, and this is just one particular well that's got several pivots on it. We pumped 4 million gallons for the whole year. That well this year, 24, was over 20 million. That's how bad the drought was. And a lot of people don't even realize, oh, it's just a dry weather. It wasn't just dry weather. It was extremely bad.
And critical periods in your growing cycle.
Yeah. Extremely critical, which is March to August, October, August, September. That's when our main growth.
How many acres does that cover?
That one pivot about 200. Yeah. 2 pivots is in a small plant, but yeah, it goes about 200. Yeah, it went from 4 million to 20 in 1 year. Now, because it was extreme, and I want to make sure that we can recharge these well systems with these aquifers for years to come to handle these extremes, because these extremes are becoming more the norm than less than norm. I hate to say it, this is what we do. I mean, we live this every year. And when you have to pump that kind of water, that's a lot of difference. Somehow we got to be prepared for that. And it's crazy. On our whole farm, we pumped more in 1 month than we did in the whole year of 23.
Did you have any danger of needing to lower your pump?
Do what?
Did you have any danger of needing to lower your pump?
No, we did not. Now, all of ours are really deep. They always have been. And as far as I can remember, most of ours, if not all of them, are in the Queen Burn, which you know what that is. So, we never have had a problem. But I want to walk out there and, nothing coming out of the pivot one day. And that's my fear, is I walk out there one day and there's nothing there. I can't see in the ground. But y'all say there's something, there's pretty much unlimited in that range, but I don't know.
Jason may remember, and Brandon too, there was discussion in the Edisto about the ability for aquifers to recover from season to season. And if you look at the water level charts, usually you see them go like this, but for the most part, you see it bounce right back up in the winter. That's when most recharge happens. Right?
Yeah.
Summer, you're getting a lot of loss to evapotranspiration. In the winter, if you get a good amount of rain, it's just bounce right back up. So whether you're moving 4 MGD or 20 MGD, you have to consider that question, is this too much for it to recover? And if I have 3 back-to-back years where I pump 20, is that really going to dewater the aquifer?
Some great utilities don't want to be wells, we don't search for three. Racetrail water and sewer authority is to build all wells now, we've got two surface water treatment plants, city water beach. Same thing, and they use a lot of water. So removing that use from the aquifer ensures that aquifer stays at a decent level.
So, yeah, I think the capacity use program, the groundwater management plan is working as intended. Maybe, I mean, that's relieving stress on the aquifer that if had gone unchecked, would have caused problems, so.
And we're looking at this year, because of COVID, recharge is now. That's when the recharge, I mean, we're going to, that's basically where we are, we're December. The only negative rain events we've had really in this state since the beginning of March has been from Debbie and Hurricane Helene.
Yeah.
And most of Helene was in the upstate, it recharged the rivers, because most of that came down. But the rainfall, I mean, like in my area, we got like 8 inches, somewhere out of Debbie. We didn't get but like 1.25 inches out of Helene. Since then, we've only got, because we measure this stuff every day. This is our livelihood. Since then, we've only got 1.28 inches of rain since Tropical Storm, Hurricane Helene, up until now. We're not getting rainfall for the recharge.
Seeing in Orangeburg County, I mean, they had that 8 to 12-inch event.
Yeah. And see, they had that, and we didn't get it.
What, 50 square miles?
But yeah, that's what I'm, the dreams of life.
So, I mean, that's a good segue to, it sounds like you're talking about is helping build resilience. We're seeing changing conditions, and all the other RBCs have recognized this too, is that we may need more robust systems to be able to adapt to these changing conditions, and that speaks to resilience, and that's why folks from the Office of Resilience and Risk Reduction are here too. There's a lot of good recommendations in their plan that encourage the RBC to support and adopt. So keep that in mind as you work on your plan and think about your recommendations. It's nice to have consistency among all these different plans, basin to basin, but with other state plans like the Resilience Risk Reduction Plan.
One goes back to closure of International Papers plant in Georgetown have taking water out of Santee, because they've got that long canal that goes to this, from Santee to this sand pit that diverts water to feed that plant. It's
good question.
The canal's as wide as this room is long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Leanne, are you getting ready to say something?
I'll say that the question has come up looking after that, and we're still trying to figure that out. And then we have an approach, so we get a draw there, but the question is, what happens with that diversion point, because I do have a statute that gives them the ability to do that if they don't permit. So we're trying to figure it out. Right.
It's a unique situation.
Yes. Yeah.
Not really under the existing Surface Water Act exemption.
Yeah, they. So it's very
hands-on.
unique.
Without being maintained it for all these years, I mean, plant, closing the plant, there'll be nobody to maintain it now.
But part of the plan, there are other operations, box will still be operation.
The part that needed that water, closed. They probably won't give that up.
Yeah. All right. Is that everything for group 2, pretty much? Yeah. Okay. Brandon, any group 3 have any other ideas, or what is group 3 think? And I know you were just 2 folks, yourself and Brandon.
Okay, we just kind of had some general ideas. One, we were looking at overall idea, just protecting the watershed as best as possible, keeping it open to all users, and making sure one user wasn't getting more than their fair share of the pie, and trying to keep things fair and equitable from the top of the bottom of the basin. Um, Under the outcomes we would like to encourage, we would look at trying to build consensus on policy recommendations, including recommendations for local level and municipalities. Trying to expand on public education and the understanding of drought management.
Okay, anything else?
Yeah, okay, under the types of actions we would like to promote, under groundwater resources, looking at the methodologies and projected demand forecasts. Trying to make sure the methodologies are up to date for realistic and realistic for the different sectors.
Okay.
Trying to look at, I guess, the actual supplies, maybe, municipal, that doesn't seem to get as much demand as some of the potential water users like data centers.
So tell me more about that. What are you suggesting?
Let's see, I have notes here. Basically just making, ensuring that the projected demand forecasts include things for, some of the data centers that seem to be having high usage on some of the resources.
Yeah. But so I'll mention one thing about that, because it's been discussed in the other councils, is if we do these demand projections, typically we're looking at, okay, what if a data center came to this location and needed 30 MGD. And we're not looking at specific examples because we would just be throwing a dart at the wall with assumption. Now, if we know of a particular instance where there has been discussion of development and high water use, we could do a scenario to specifically look at that. But generally, our projections always focus on existing users. So we increase, if it's applicable, use of existing users. And for ag, we don't necessarily increase the use because unless we decide, oh, it looks like they're going to expand their operation, irrigate the other 50% of their fields or something. But we haven't specifically looked at like data center scenario because again, we're not assessing individual users or individual proposed users. Just like we couldn't.
But like the ag, you've got new tech, the population's growing, you have new agricultural techniques where people are able to grow corn and soybeans in the same year.
Yeah.
So what farmers are now doing is adding more and more irrigation in South Carolina. So you've got to feed the world, right? I mean, the demands of that are such that, there's a lot of that that's going to go on. There's our situation, there's only so much more that will be done. You got to feed people.
So as far as like data centers go, would it make sense just to, as on the side, address that it's a concern for the future and make some suggestions on how it could be regulated in the future? I mean, instead of you putting it in the model, I think you put those future things in the model, but recognizing it's a concern and addressing that as kind of a side point.
That's one way to look at it, but I almost think you can't look at it. If you want to do a what if scenario, you talk about and say, what if we put a data center at this location, like or whatever, and it had a high demand, high consumptive use, what would happen? We can do that scenario. I mean, it's something we can look at. We've kind of been hesitant to do that because, again, I'm picking winners and losers, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do it. I mean, that's one way to say, well, here's the areas of the basin that can better support growth and development. We encourage growth and development here because we've done some scenarios and it looks like you could pull out another 20 MGD without having any noticeable impact on minimum stream flows downstream. I'm just making it up. So it's something we can do if you don't think that's useful.
I do, but I'm selfish.
Honestly, I'm surprised developers haven't asked for that coming out. Where would you suggest we increase our water use in the bay? Where do we grow? Some of the bay has had a lot of, we didn't see any projected shortages way into the future. The existing users acknowledge that we're not really stressed right now. We're going to be for a while, the other basins are a little different.
There's a lot of difficulty in forecasting, as you pointed out, the throwing the dart at the data centers too much. Is it a $1 billion data center? Is it a $10 billion data center? That could be.
Why do they so much water? Cool.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
It was nice to see, the discussion of, addressing policy recommendations at the local level. I mean, I know that might sound kind of piecemeal. I've been involved with development roundtables, which were that these were developed as a compromise between staff, conservation interest groups and developers, just to reach a consensus on land development code. I mean, whenever county or city governments through developing their stormwater ordinances or water quality buffers or development standards. So much of that discussion is about how to manage water quality. So
The last 20 years has been a revolution in this quality and water quality. 20 years ago, communities didn't care about either. Then they cared about water quality because people were getting flooded. And then they finally realized that water quality was as big an issue as water. So most big communities have got stormwater access, they got their own stormwater plans. About that.
Some of the other basins, especially the upstate basins like the Broad, have made recommendations to provide like suggested land use ordinances or suggestions on riparian buffers and implementing green infrastructure and other things that are implemented at the local level. They realize, the hands are tied. RBCs realize there's not much they can do other than make recommendations and encourage this, but they have identified that doing this at the local level is what they need to do. Especially up in the Broad, there's a lot of issues with sedimentation in the region and losing storage capacity. There's 13 reservoirs in the Broad that are used for water supply. Some of those get a lot of sedimentation, and during lean, they got a ton of sedimentation, a lot of water, a lot of storage loss. And it costs more to treat the water. You're getting scoured streams and stuff coming in too. So there's not much they can do about that other than encourage the local governments to have jurisdiction in the watershed to implement better BMPs to protect their water supply reservoirs. So,
You know what storage capacity has been lost in Marion since the election? And there's a lot of sediment. That's too late. There's a lot.
They're, I mean, we're kind of unique in that as flat as things are for the size of the reservoir, acres capacity, there's not that much shortage. Yeah, it's not.
But probably, there's a lot of sediment.
For sure. And some of it does get past things pretty well. Yeah, we can pull on some.
okay. Well, good. That's all great information. We will kind of organize that for you and organize it in a way that hopefully will make it easy when we develop our vision and goal statement next month. You're going to have to develop these vision goals in a very short session, but I think we can do it. All right. Just have one thing here that meeting your preference community and where we meet. And I sent out a survey, most of you filled that out. I was asking what your preferences are regarding time of day. One of you said 9 to 1. For those that didn't do the survey or you've had a change of mind? Do you still like the kind of the more morning, 9 to 1? Would you rather do 10 to 2? We've been keeping them right around 4 hours with lunch somewhere in there.
Who's got the farthest drive? 72. And that's an hour and 20 minutes.
Hour, yeah. We'll talk about location too, but I know location impacts how long you would be, when you would be. But is 9 o'clock start what you like?
That would be my preference, because it doesn't kill me the whole day.
That's what I said too.
And then this is 4:30, so before I get back, done.
Yeah.
Myself,
Yeah. Okay.
That is mine.
Okay. Okay. Focus on 9 o'clock start times. There was kind of an even mix about some of the days that I offer. What I've got here is the generic monthly schedule that shows when the other RBC meet. LSS and the Little Panther, actually they meet the first Thursday of the month. We have to avoid that because I'm involved and DES folks are involved in that. Upper Savannah meets the second Wednesday. Meets the third Wednesday. The Water SC meetings are typically the third Thursday, but there's a couple months where they're moved. So that leaves the ones where I say option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 open. I saw some comments on the survey that one member said they like the second week each month. Somebody else said avoid Monday or Tuesday meetings.
Well, it makes a difference now that we're having it in the mornings. I think a lot of my reason for avoiding Tuesdays was I have council meetings first and third Tuesdays of the month. So
those afternoon meetings.
If we're meeting in the morning, I get those are evening meetings.
Evening, okay. In January, unfortunately, the Lower Savannah Talkatchee is not meeting the first week, they're meeting the second week. So we may need to meet a little different. In fact, DES staff would prefer in January if we maybe meet the 4th week or the 3rd week. But then we could have the option to reverting back to the 2nd week or even the 1st week if you like it. But
what is the meeting on January 16th? Just we attend in person, January Water SC.
Water SC, yeah.
Okay.
That's on the 3rd.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes to pay attention, we need to be there more too. Yeah.
I think the location, I don't know offhand, I just listening session is gonna be a state park water, I don't know.
So Columbia, basically.
Lightly. And I think to do it on.
Evening.
There are millions. Yeah, but oh yeah, I guess it wasn't the phone. Yeah.
Are the looking sessions also going to be on ETV?
I don't know if I can find out. Yeah.
So, those red numbers are what your preferences were, but I didn't even ask about the 3rd or 4th week. I just asked 4 options there. But what do y'all prefer?
I will say my 4th Thursdays are not an option.
4th Thursdays are not an option, so that would be 7, so that would be good for you.
Can't do option 4.
Can't do option 4, so I'm hearing multiple people saying no on option 4.
Well, if we take a vote on option 3, just because it's the highest number, no one said they can't do it yet.
Yeah.
And now that we know it's in the morning.
I make a motion that we vote positive for option 3.
Second. There's a second. All in favor of option 3? Okay, well, that's the majority. We're not going to be able to satisfy everybody.
So that's the second Tuesday. We're going to try to do that every month.
So that's the second Tuesday. Now,
January.
we wouldn't do that in January, unfortunately, because that week's already very busy for DES staff and myself, because we had 3 RDC meetings in a row, and there's something going on Tuesday, I feel like. But that would be our regular meeting date for February. Okay, second Tuesday of the month. For January, we have to pick a different option. Could we do option 5 or 6?
January 28th or 29th.
Tuesday, Wednesday, 28th. Either one works for me. Yeah. guess I'm seeing people with calendars, which is
Yep.
really good. Anybody opposed to either of those?
Which ones?
5 or 6, the 28th or 29th of January.
I can't do that. I'll be out of town.
Be out of town.
I kind of puts us 3 weeks behind, but I know a lot of people are in town for the new year.
Yeah, the first 2 weeks unfortunately are just booked solid for DES staff, so we have to do that.
We also have the week of the 15th, week at 21st, is Tuesday through Friday. Is in January.
Yeah, I didn't put 5 weeks in here, because all months don't have 5 weeks.
It's because of her.
Yeah.
Well, I have a meeting the 28th I don't want to go to, if you guys.
Well, I think it's 29th, so the 28th I can make.
Let's do January 28th. I vote that we do January 28th in January of 2025. And then we'll be meeting 2 weeks later. Is that good?
Yeah, well, so we meet 2 weeks later, essentially, but, again, these first 3 meetings were informational. One thing I have to check is I was gonna have Hope Zell hopefully present the next meeting, and I just need to make sure she's available on the 28th. If she is, we could rearrange some things, we could figure something else out, so it's not a big deal. But.
Or she could delegate it to one of the drought areas, southern drought area to present for.
Are you on there?
I am in southern drought. Okay. Well, I was gonna ask Mickey which county he's in. Which county are you in?
Clarence.
Clarence.
Okay.
It's something.
Okay, I think Sarah's motion for the 28th work, things like, right?
Is that okay?
No, yeah, for January the 28th. So we'll be doing the second Tuesday for January. We'll be doing Tuesday the 28th.
At 9 o'clock.
9 to 1.
9 to 1. So that's the final question. We can meet here, Andy Cooper has other facilities that we meet at outside.
Check them bill.
But pretty tough to get in there right now. Yeah. Does this location work for everyone in general? So we could move it around too. It is nice to have consistency, but people have to drive an hour half of your time, and some people have to drive 15 minutes, then you still have to drive an hour half of your time, John. But I think most of the people are coming from the south, right? Everybody, you, where are you from? But you're, how far are you?
It's about an hour, 15.
Okay. Well, for the time being, maybe we'll come in. This is a nice sized room.
Yeah. I'll see what I can do to get it.
Okay. Your other facilities that you're looking at are generally in this area too. So,
If it's not available, we could be meeting at our Jeffrey Hydro Station looking for, and then, depending on how much time we have, we could do a little bit of field trip right there, at the Hydro Station, a lot right next to it. So that's another one.
okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. Before we wrap up, any final comments or questions?
As far as an alternate, we need to tell a specific person so they can record the name or what?
Yeah, so we like to add them to all the email distributions, so they're getting all the information that you are. They know when meetings are. We're passing out material for you ahead of the meeting. They get to see it as well, even if they're not coming to the meeting. They might attend online. So when you pick an alternate, send myself or Scott or any of the planning team an email. You say, my alternate, here's a phone number, here's their email.
Okay.
Everybody both trying to find an alternate. I know it's always possible, but when you can find one, that's really encouraging. Got one? Good. Anything else? So thank you all for your patience. Appreciate it.